their time and their talents to bless us and make our life greater for them. We pray now that as we discuss the city's businesses tonight, we get that directed, that as a community we might be able to consult and to hear each other's opinions and respect those opinions. We pray for God's direction as we make those decisions. We would make decisions that would be the benefit of the best of the community as a whole. We pray for those that stand in need of special blessings in our community at this time, that they would be blessed with those blessings, that thy blessings might rain down upon all of us. Receive these blessings at this time and give gratitude and thank you. We pray the Son of our Savior, Jesus Christ.
Amen. Thank you.
Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that. We'll move on to item 1, approval of the agenda. Anybody want to make a motion to approve our agenda tonight?
Mayor, if there's no changes or amendments, I'll make the motion that the agenda be approved as published and as listed tonight.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second.
Turek, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Staley, aye.
Nice and I.
Thank you, gentlemen. Item 2, announcements. Do we have any announcements to bring forth from this body? Okay. Item 3, declaration of abstentions and conflicts. Anything to declare at this point? Okay, we'll move on to item 4, our consent agenda. To consideration to approve the board audit report for May 2014. Any questions or comments on that?
Mayor, this is something we discussed last night at our meeting, and if there's no other discussion, I'll move to approve the consent agenda, which consists of the board audit report for May 2014.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second.
Nice and I.
Staley, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Turek, aye.
All right, thank you. Item 5, Planning Commission appointment. Recommendation and consideration to appoint a member to the Planning Commission. We had some wonderful candidates, and I thank all of those of you that might be out here for applying. We would like to submit the name of Rick Henry to replace Rick Schofield on the Planning Commission, and also to recommend that we have Jason Smith fulfill the seat of the chairman of the Planning Commission at this point. So that's my recommendation. Entertain a motion and a second.
Mayor, I'll just, for clarification, Jason currently holds the planning commission seat. We're just giving him the chairmanship, and then Rick Henry would be a new member. And I'll make the motion that, do we need a motion and a second on this, Council Starkey? We do?
Yeah.
Okay. Make the motion that Rick Henry be appointed to a term on the planning commission, and that Jason Smith be appointed as the chairman of the planning commission.
Are you, just for clarification purposes, are we going to make him a member of that board, or is he going to move to the,
He will be a member of the
he'll be a
board.
member of the board, not the alternate?
Right.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
I do have a motion and a second. Okay. Okay, we'll do, well, this is a roll call vote. Okay. All right.
Nice and I.
Staley, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Turek, aye.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate that. Item 6, preliminary plat. Consideration to approve the preliminary plat for Rusted Hills Phase 6, located at approximately 1000 east and south side of Majestic Drive. Applicant Ray DeWitt.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll get started as this kind of pops up on the on the screen. As stated, the applicant is requesting approval of the preliminary plat for Rusted Hills Phase 6, and the applicant is wishing to develop 25 lots on an area covering 11.83 acres. The location of this project is zoned single-family residential, 15,000 square foot minimum, or referred to as the R115 zoning designation. This Phase 6 was not part of the original project for Rusted Hills. This was basically a square of area that was kind of left out. It was owned by Mr. DeWitt, still is, but wasn't part of the original 1 through 5 project that's already begun. But since then, the developer and Mr. DeWitt have got together and found they always planned for this piece to come in. It's just that Mr. DeWitt wasn't ready at the time, but now is wishing to join in, and this is the proposal for that phase 6. They'll be broken up. It looks like they might even do it in 3 different phases of number 6, and that's okay with those darker lines. I'm not too concerned about that right now. This will just be the overall area that's left there. So the requested preliminary plat meets the zoning regulation requirements and other city ordinances as it relates to this particular location. Staff has reviewed the request and recommends approval with conditions of the preliminary plat. The Planning Commission reviewed the request at their May 21st, 2014 meeting, and the Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval of the preliminary plat for Russet Hills Phase 6 to the City Council, and based on the following findings and subject to the conditions. And I'm pretty sure they are our standard 11 conditions. Just want to make sure we didn't add, yep, they're the standard ones that we have. There's no extra special ones for this project. So I'll be glad to answer any questions the council might have on this proposed preliminary plat.
I've got a question for you, Drew. The record states that it's an R115 zoning. How is it that lots 11, 10, 9, 8, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 are less than 15,000 square feet?
That's a good question, because I thought we looked that over my glasses. Yeah, that's true. There is lots 8 through 11. Well, actually, and the ones below, they'll have to make those adjustments. So, because they do have to be minimums. And we don't have a plus or minus in there, so
yeah.
I think they'll be able to probably make some, because again, most of them are just shy a couple hundred square feet, and they have others that are
adjust
above.
that road or something, but there's not
Yeah.
a lot of room in that quadrant to adjust lines unless they move a road a little bit.
And which is, I've we've seen it before. It's not too bad to have a road just do a little bit of a bend, and we'll either let them lose a lot or fix the roads, make the lots the way they need to be.
So how does that affect the application tonight?
Well, if you want to approve it, just make sure, in your motion, we'd approve the preliminary plat with the fixing of all lots will need to be the 15,000 square foot. That'll suffice it. And then before it comes back as a final plat, they'll all be adjusted. And you could even put there, if they end up losing a lot, we'll allow that the preliminary plat won't have to come back, because they may end up just having to eliminate something right there in the middle.
Yeah, it looks like there's room on lots 21 through 25 to shrink those and maybe adjust the road a little bit.
Yeah. Let me just take a peek at the minimum widths. Yeah, you're talking maybe 2 feet is all they'd have to push that road to take out, because it looks like they're shy about, at worst case, 225, roughly, give or take a square foot here or there. So with those being 100 foot wide, 2 feet is all they'll have to drop that down. You probably won't even notice it if you're driving down the road. So
I'm surprised the Planning Commission didn't catch that for us.
I am too. I'm surprised I didn't catch it. I looked at that and I thought I went through and saw all of them that way. So
I don't believe this is a public hearing, Mayor, so I'll just go ahead and motion that we approve the preliminary plat for Rusted Hills Phase 6, located at approximately 1000 East and the south side of Majestic Drive, with the condition that they adjust all lots to meet the minimum R115 zoning.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second.
Turner guy.
Segmiller, aye.
Staley, aye.
Nice and I.
Thank you, gentlemen. Item 7, public hearings and related ordinances. Item A, public hearing for the consideration to approve a zone change application Z-14-05, requesting to change the present zone from R112 single family 12,000 square foot lots to C1 community commercial zone located on the southwest corner of 2000 South Washington Fields Road. Applicant Greg Whitehead.
Thank you, Mayor. And as stated, this is requesting the zone change of approximately 3.07 acres. As noted, the current zoning on it is the single-family residential, 12,000 square foot minimum, or R112, and they're proposing to go to the C1, which is community commercial. The general plan land use designation for this location is neighborhood commercial. It also has with low-density residential to the north, east, and west, and neighborhood commercial to the south. The surrounding zoning to this parcel is R112 to the west, agricultural, and R112 to the north, R110 to the east, and with agricultural and administrative professional to the south. This lot kind of sits at a very weird angle, so we had some double ones in there, so sorry for all that lengthiness, but that's what they are. The staff reviewed the requested change and finds that it conforms to the general plan and the zoning ordinance as outlined in the city codes. The Planning Commission reviewed the request at their May 21st meeting. The Planning Commission, by a vote of 3-2, recommended approval of Z-1405 for the zone change request from the R112 to the C1, or community commercial, to the City Council and based on the findings. So they did have some lengthy discussion with the Planning Commission. It did go 3-2, and I think a lot of it came because the applicant did state that they wanted to put, and I will put on the screen what the developer brought that night. And I think most of it hinged, and I'll try to, this is kind of a hard map, but this is a convenience store. Then these two rectangles here with a canopy over gas pumps. And then you can see the parking, that's pretty standard, but then there's a rectangle box right here, if you follow my pin, that would just be a strip mall that would just carry, again, permitted uses that fall within the C1. Offices, maybe a dry cleaner, a bank, things like that, kind of the least intrusive commercial zoning. But the biggest issue that got the Planning Commission to the split vote was, I think, the gas station pumps, which you see up here toward the corner of 2000 South and Washington Fields Road. So,
Drew, why would the applicant bring this drawing at this point in the process? Isn't this something that should be addressed at the conditional use permit stage?
Well, it could, but I think he just wanted to, bring out what their intentions were, which we allow them to do. There's only times we don't allow people to come, as if we're doing a zone change and they want to throw a subdivision plat out. So we don't let them do that, because then people may tend to think that this is approved because all those lots are going to be exactly that way. But with this, it's just a layout of a proposal of what their plan is on this particular piece. They're not going to be changing it. They understand it will be a conditional use permit, and again, that's why there are no elevations or anything to that effect that were brought at this point for that. So now, just to note, you can see down on this end there will be a driveway or an entrance, egress and ingress at this point. And the reason this is so important and why it ended up out here is, if you can see that 607 number, that's kind of key, and then where the start of it, but you can see it just goes to the back of the curb on the radius there. And the city has a standard of 650 feet from the center line of a street to the center line of any other driveway before it can be a full access. Anything less than that, it'd have to be right in, right out only. So with that said, you see there's another proposed entrance right here, which will be right in, right out only, meaning that there will be forced to have a median put in on Washington Fields Road, probably all the way from the intersection back past this particular driveway. But again, I just want to explain why the vote, sometimes when you get a vote and it's split, pretty much the reasoning came was having gas pumps there.
Would the second access also be right in, right out only?
You mean down here on Washington Fields Road? Or
yes, further south. On
no,
Washington
this one
Fields.
could be full.
I thought you said, is the standard 600 or 650?
650. And with that 7, they're shy 40-something feet, but by the time they get to the center of 2,000,
Oh, it's not from the radius.
it's not from the radius, it's from the center of the road to the center of the driveway. So the engineer assured us
If-
and the
if this-
applicant that it's 650 feet.
If it got to that point, would there be any additional lanes for traffic deceleration, acceleration along there, or is it wide enough?
It's wide because it's two lanes at that point. But if a traffic engineer came back, which we would require at development time, I think if they came back, then Public Works would look at that. If it said they needed to add, encroach in there with a decel area to pull off and then make a right-hand turn, that would be required as part of their project. So this design would change a bit, but so they might end up adding just a little, turn lane right in here. So they would change the sidewalk, curb and gutter to add a lane and then go in. It's kind of like the one you see when you turn at the Red Robin or into Coles on Telegraph. There's an extra little area that you go off and make a right-hand turn. But again, that would be based upon a traffic study when that time comes.
Thank you, Drew. Any questions for Drew?
While we're on traffic, 600 East, would there be medians on 2000 South and 600 East? I see that's a road behind this proposed
Yeah, that's the
development.
old Washington Fields Road, which is, it's 600 East at this point. So I'd probably defer that. I don't want to say much more. Maybe I'd let Mike, Mr. Shaw, answer that. If I think he's had some discussion on or some thoughts on this over previous ones, so I'd probably defer that particular question to
Right.
Mike, so I don't overspeak or underspeak.
Can you zoom out a little bit there, Drew?
I may not be able to pick up because that's out on this one.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping to see.
I can bring this up on Google Earth if you want. If there's something you're looking, where do you want to?
Well, my question is really, that's just their rendering. It would all come in at the phases that would come after the zone change, but I'm curious whether there's a wall behind that proposed gas station, a wall or any sort of thing to create a buffer.
There would have to be, because anytime you have a split residential backed up to commercial, it's a mandatory 6-foot block wall.
So there'd be a block wall along
Yeah. Well, it says side obscuring, but we don't allow anything. It's either a concrete or a block walls really because we don't allow fence slatting or anything, so it just ends up being a block or concrete wall. That stamped type ones that they can put in between pillars.
Ready to hear the public?
Okay, thanks, Drew.
Okay.
This is a public hearing. We invite all those that have an interest or a non-interest in this project to come on up. Please state your name and
Ryan Robison, 718 East Desert Bloom Court. My residence is right here, which property line comes along the road. I missed last week's hearing as I got the notice a week late, and I barely got the notice for this one. So I'm not sure what the protocol is for getting hearings out, but it's not very timely. Voicing concern again for commercial in that location. This conversation's come up before, and we talked about putting a funeral home in that location. Talked about the concern for property value, the concern for the quality of the residential area that's already there. Talked about the concern about the traffic, just by adding that small amount of commercial and introducing the rest. Obviously, this is a bigger commercial project. Traffic concerns are even higher. We currently have, get that there, issues with this intersection. There have been multiple accidents. we had to request when striping was redone, that was not indicated as a right turn only. And access in and out of the subdivision here was becoming even more hazardous because traffic was allowed in that right lane. And the city was quick to restripe that as a right turn lane only, which has been very helpful, even though there are instances where that is disregarded. So still is a concern for traffic. I know that the light has been discussed about that. People come down this road well above the speed limit. They come up and over the street well above the speed limit. They come down the street well above the speed limit. Any ins and outs that you're going to talk about on that street are going to be, in my opinion, a major concern, which just amplifies the reason that this should maintain as a residential, to maintain the image of what is currently there. And just point out that if we're looking for commercial places, there are other places in Washington where commercial could be used. And points may have been made last week about commercial on Main Street. Is there something we can do for the commercial that's looking to come here to give them incentive to beautify Washington City Main Street? What I don't want to see happen is the personality disorder that I observe on Washington Main Street, where it's a kind of a hodgepodge of mixed and successful or unsuccessful businesses to now be allowed to come into down Washington Fields Road. I know there's potential for a lot of growth, but I'd rather see that we have a very clear set picture of what all of that looks like, and that we clean up Washington Main Street first, make every offer incentive possible to make businesses go there first before we start to intrude upon the fields. And we're already frustrated over what happened further up Washington Fields Road at the intersection of Washington Dam Road. That already is a major eyesore for Washington Fields as you drive down there and you see the block wall as dirt was taken away from the hill, and I don't know what the arrangement was with that property owner. I think it would have been a much cleaner, better looking arrangement had the city made some arrangement with the property owners to take that over, to buy it from them, to either eliminate those properties. But now that we've got wall up there, it's an eyesore. So what is this going to look like? And I know we can talk about what that will look like, but the point is, with all of the traffic and the hazards we've already had so far, that I think we need to be really careful about allowing any changes to what the fields look like. I don't know if you have any questions with any of those elements or our subdivision, Desert Meadows here.
I would just ask Ryan if you have any ideas on how to encourage growth along Telegraph Street. We would welcome those. We would love to see commercial fill in along those vacant pieces of property that are there, and kind of improve existing businesses there. So yeah, we understand that, and that point's well taken.
Thank you.
It's a challenge because we've got a gas station that remains vacant right there on Telegraph for whatever reason.
Anybody else?
Sherry Reeder. I was at the meeting. I was heavily on drugs that night. I just got out of the hospital, but I was there. So I live right there in Nichols Peak, which is the neighborhood adjacent to this, and the property is also my father's property. So there's kind of, here I am. But my concern is, and it's the concern not only for that property, but the whole Washington Fields area, as we know, the subdivision there, we were the first subdivision in that area. So we've been there a long time, 24 years exact. And
Robert Everett was the first subdivision.
Well, okay, Robert, his house is still kind of by itself, though. We were, anyway, and so, I get a lot of flack about change is going to happen, things are going to happen. We get that. My concern is when the change happens, what is it going to look like? What are we going to do? Like Ryan stated, we get so anxious to get these businesses in that we I don't see that there's a lot of thought through. I'm sure there is, but I just hope that we take into consideration what's our vision for Washington Fields. It's a beautiful area. Obviously, people are coming there. They're building homes. There's lots of homes. And so as we plan, I hope that is taken into consideration. None of my neighbors are here. They're pretty browbeat over the whole mortuary thing and feel like, you know, it didn't matter. And just some of the concerns I know they have is this: if this convenience store goes in, is it going to be a 24-hour store? You know, is it going to be open 24 hours? Do they get to have a big sign that blares in their windows? You know, and then of course the 600, the road right behind, that is a pretty busy road for our neighborhood. That's one of the accesses to our neighborhood. It's not curb, gutter. Is all that going to happen as part of this project if it takes off? Mr. Whitehead, I don't know if he's here, but you know, he stated that I brought some pictures of some ideas that I've seen because I do care about what it looks like out there. And he stated that, you know, not everybody wants to look like agriculture or whatever, which I get that, but he assured us that night that it would be beautiful and it would be pleasing. So I want to know what beautiful and pleasing looks like to him, because I can tell you if we went up in Green Springs and we built a barn convenience store, that wouldn't be beautiful and pleasing to the Green Springs area. So I guess my thing is that we really take a look at it. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it because I've faced the fact that things are going to happen. But I would, you know, hope that we really consider a vision, a plan for the Washington Fields area.
Sherry, are you for this then or against it?
No. You know what? I've just come. I'm for it. You know, like I said, I know that that's a hot piece of property for a project like this, and so, you know, if it became residential, I would be fine with that too. But like I say, I've done a lot of thinking, pondering it. My dad knows how I feel about it. We've talked about it because I do think I'm concerned about the roads. Everything Ryan said, you know, I totally agree with that intersection. We have so many bikers. I think about the bikers. I mean, when the Washington Fields Road's approved, I hope we have a bike lane because we have hundreds of bikers out there. And if someone's turning in that crazy intersection, I mean, it's scary. It's scary to go walking because you cannot see who's coming around. And so, you know, all those things need to be taken into consideration. And I know that farther down, I don't know how to look at this thing because it looks backwards to me, but you know, I know they've talked about bringing a road up farther around the hill too and coming in. But
Sherry, when you were on a committee about 2 years ago that made general plan amendments to change the land use designation to this piece of property to neighborhood commercial, did you, and as part of that committee, discuss some of these items, some of these concerns that you're bringing up now when you made that recommendation?
I was at one meeting. That's the only meeting I was to, and so it wasn't a big discussion with me. I know years back that my dad had proposed to put a convenience store there, and it got shot down, and then there was no gas allowed. You know, that's what I've heard time after time after time, that, you know, we would never have the gasoline, it would never come in. I think it would be hard to have a convenience store without gas pumps. And obviously people in the fields would be happy to go get their Pepsi somewhere other than Swig or, you know, up in town. But, you know, I wasn't at a lot of those meetings. I was on that committee, but only was at a couple of meetings before it kind of was decided. So anyway, that's my concern. Any other questions?
Sherry, where in the fields, and I'm asking you because I know you come and are quite an activist on the Washington Fields and do a lot about it. If this isn't a good spot for a gas station, where else is down there?
Well, it depends on whose property is, but you know, the Snows right across from us is an ideal property, especially when the high school and those things come in. But you know, the Snows aren't interested in selling. I know that. If if I can put up a picture and just kind of give you an idea, just because I want you to see, and I'm not saying, have vision that I'm not saying it has to be farm related, but Drew, does this just... So if you've ever been to Farmington, this is right by Lagoon. And I love what Farmington City has done. I mean, they've put a mall right in the middle of agriculture, and it fits. So I'm not saying that this stuff isn't going to fit, but I mean, this is just kind of an idea. And at the Planning Commission meeting, you know, one of the people said, well, not everybody wants a silo. Well, it doesn't have to have a silo. I'm just giving ideas. Something like this would fit, I feel like. And this did have gas pumps. I just didn't take any pictures of that. But that's just... This is right as you exit to go to Lagoon. It's just straight ahead. Oops, sorry, yeah. Right. It would... As you exit, you turn right to go to Lagoon. So what is that? East? Yeah, east. And then it's just right there. Yeah. It's just, and it has a car wash in it. It had like 4 gas pumps and a drive-through. I mean, it was nice. So, just make sure. Oh, and the other thing I just want to end with is that whatever happens, or whatever first commercial building comes out there, I just hope we set a standard. You know, I look at Park City, Kayenta, these places, they have a standard of what they want to feel like. And like I say, whether people believe it or not, there's something out in Washington Fields that drew them there. There's a feeling out there that's different than a lot of other areas, and maybe because I live out there, I don't know. But anyway.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks, Drew.
Anybody else?
I'll step up for a minute. My name is Jeff Rever, and Greg Whitehead works with me. He's actually in Florida today, so he couldn't be here, asked me to step in. I understand exactly what Ryan and Sherry are talking about, and would just make a couple comments. One, we didn't have to throw out a schematic, a preliminary schematic of what this would look like. The reason we did that is because we wanted to make sure that we had the support of the community in doing this development. Our clients want to make sure that it's something that's appealing, not just aesthetically, but to the community, and that it's a benefit to the community. And I can guarantee you right now, is we're acting as their project manager, that anything that we do architecturally or aesthetically, we're more than happy to sit down with Ryan and Sherry and whoever else would like to participate in that process to make sure that the design and the aesthetics of the project not only are compatible with what their thought process is, but will set a standard for Washington Fields that you can carry forward. So, I mean, we're here because we understood that this was zoned in the master plan as neighborhood commercial. We want to take advantage of that neighborhood commercial. We've been able to negotiate a deal with Ralph on this property. We think this is a really good application for that property. It will provide a benefit to the community. We'll make sure that we address the traffic issues that Ryan has brought up. I think there's ways to mitigate those potential issues. We're very preliminary in this process. Obviously, we're not prepared to move forward if we don't get some kind of a commitment from the city and from the community that they want this and that they'll support it. So having said that, any questions that you have that I might be able to answer?
Jeff, what assurances then could you give us as to the design, other than, I guess, your word,
well, you
on the record
that. I mean,
well, we don't, and this is a topic that's come up before in other areas. There's 2 schools of thought. There's a school of thought that a city should implement design guidelines and that they should control and direct what certain neighborhoods or their city entirely should look like when it's built out. There's the other school of thought that we let the free market dictate it, and the person with the skin in the game ought to build it in a way that it would attract customers. So we're torn between this. I tend to lean a little more design guidelines.
Yeah.
Some tend to lean a little more free
Yeah.
free market on this. But in this case, I think the point is well taken that this may be the first commercial development, and we would hate to offer this zoning and then have something come in that didn't meet what we're understanding
Yeah.
in this conversation.
Well, I don't know what else I can do other than to tell you that we will work very closely with the city and with the community to make sure that whatever the design is something that is pleasing. I know we're not going to be able to please everybody,
No.
and there are cost elements to this. I mean, we can't do certain types of construction because of the cost, but the photos that Sherry showed, I think, are well within the realm of what we would be capable of doing. I think we can improve on that. I'm not sure I like the corrugated steel aspects of it. I think more laid in place stone or rock would have a much more appealing aesthetic effect. But
So are you saying then that at the conditional use permit phase, which would be the next phase if this is
Mhm.
approved, you would be prepared to bring
some elevations,
some elevations and
absolutely.
designs that
Yeah.
and welcome input and discussion in that process,
Yeah.
because ultimately the planning commission would then have the say if
Yeah, I
on
think
part
so.
of the use that we're wanting here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also add to that we'd be more than happy to address the traffic issues.
And I don't
In
think
that-
Mike Shaw's going to let you get away without addressing.
Yeah, well, I mean in that meeting.
Hmm.
In that conditional use, when we bring elevations in, we'll also bring in some suggested solutions for those traffic problems. Keep in mind that back building, this one right here, get oriented, this back building backs up against an elevation. So there's already an aesthetic wall there. There'll also be a concrete wall built that separates it, but it's not blocking views because it's only going to be a single level, and aesthetically it's already backed up to an elevation change. That front building is only going to be about 2,800 square feet, and we haven't really even talked about whether it's a 24-hour or not. I mean, we haven't got to that point yet. I mean, with the gas pumps, you can do that pretty easily, but as far as a convenience store being open 24/7, I doubt it. It'll probably be normal business
And
hours.
you
till
would
then.
be open to those discussions and those conditions
Yeah.
on the next phase of this
Absolutely.
process.
That's right. And the lighting, we can adjust that. I mean, I've done development projects all over the United States. And Palm Springs, Carmel, San Francisco, Chicago, Morristown, New Jersey, all of those places. And you're right, many of those communities have very strict aesthetic requirements that you have to comply with. St. George has some of those. Some of them don't make sense, but you know, they've got those in place in a lot of areas where you do development. And our vision for this, in talking with our clients and as their project manager and talking with the engineers, we haven't even got an architect yet. But in talking about the aesthetic quality, we're not talking about a gaudy project. It's not going to be a Maverick. It's going to be more of a community convenience center that's got gas pumps. And we're going to be able to provide some community retail, a pizza place, a sub shop, maybe a bank branch. You know, it depends on the market. We may not build both of those at the same time. We may need to phase it for economic reasons. Have phase one as the gas station and phase two as the retail as we get it leased up. But yes, you've got our commitment that in the process of taking it to that next step where we get an architect involved, we start doing elevations, we start preparing plans, we're more than happy to sit down and invite participation from the community as well.
Would all the business be leased then?
Pardon?
All the business be leased?
Yes. Gas stations we've already got a commitment on the convenience store and the gas station. The rest of that space, we don't have any commitments on yet.
What about, have we looked at all, could you pull the gas station, swap places with the building and the gas station to where you pulled that gas station a little
Yeah.
further around the hill so it didn't
Like I said,
impact those residents?
that's very preliminary. I mean, we want to maximize.
So it could lay out both ways as far as that goes.
Yeah, I mean, we want to maximize the efficiency of the project, obviously, for economic reasons. So there may be some restrictions in exactly what we do and how we break it up. But again, it's just a preliminary sketch. Clay, did you have anything else? Clay's our engineer. Thought he might want to say something. Anything else for me?
Clay Tolbert, Jones and DeMille Engineering. I don't know if I can add a whole lot. It seems like some of the questions, or a lot of the questions, have been addressed to the traffic issues, and those things will be taken care of during design. We have talked with staff a little bit about what has to be done on 600 East. I don't know if I can, right there. As far as that could be a right in, right out. And then you've also already talked about the stuff up on the Washington Fields Road. Now with the light coming in there, that's going to change the dynamics of that intersection quite a bit. It's going to slow it down, as well as the traffic that's coming through. And also another aspect with the traffic is a lot of the traffic that's going into town now for convenience purposes can be pulled off at this point and not use that Washington Field Road going on into, what is it, First Stop up here on the corner. So, you know, you're trying to balance about where the traffic's going. It's going to be going up and down that road anyway, but how much of it every day is going to be going up there that doesn't have to. And so a spot like this actually pulls some of the traffic more locally rather than sends it on into town. As far as the details, Jeff's talked to you about how the design could go. We just laid this out based on, he gave us a target on how many square feet. We wanted to see if we could get enough parking to accommodate what he had in mind. It's very preliminary, like he said. Things can move around. It's, like I say, nothing's set in stone other than probably that access, that 35-foot access down on the south end. And that's there because of spacing.
Thank you. Any other questions?
My name is Paul Christensen. I live at 1974 South Paloma Drive, and I'm a resident of the Washington Fields. I've lived there about 20 years. Originally, we were from Nevada, and we moved up here to get away. And when we built our home, I looked around, and decided that Washington Fields is the place I wanted to be because it was rural. And it was away from the city and the hubbub. And we have to drive into St. George to get most everything we have, and I don't mind that. I'm on the Washington City Tree Beautification Committee with Jeff Turek, so that you'll know. And it seems kind of ironic to me that some of the things which seem to be transpiring in the city don't seem to be coherent. Washington City's even entitled itself the Garden City, which I think is great and noble. I want you to know that I am an avid gardener and really love beautification. You're welcome to drive by my home at any time and see what we've done. And but I think that in your doings, I'm not for or against this situation here because I don't know exactly what's entailed, but I think that we need to keep in mind a focus. And the city needs to, if we're going to have a tree beautification committee and work on the beautification of the city, we need to keep that in plan. That we need to be objective in our things. There are some things that have been allowed and passed by the Washington City that I think are real eyesores in our community, and I don't think that they belong. There's a manor right across from where we live that was passed, and the guy wanted to put in a convenience store there, and that was defeated. But the housing development was still put in there, and now he's abandoned it, the developer's got his money and he's left. And all we have now there along the side of the road and stuff is weed patches, and the residents don't care. And I think that we need to keep in mind that if we want to make this a beautiful city, instead of just a bunch of hodgepodge things, I think we need to keep that in mind. And so, you know, there are certain cities that address things like Santa Barbara, California, where they don't allow signs over so high, and these neon signs, and they don't allow these big glaring signs that are skyscrapers that blast across the neighborhood and stuff like this. And when we lived in Vegas, we built into an area and bought into an area, and behind the door, behind the next street over, there was nothing there at the time, and then they'd come in, they developed a commercial center there, and in there they put in a Carl's Jr. And so anyway, later on, and of course, in order to facilitate their business, they would turn up the speakers on the so they could get their orders. And when I opened my window every night, I couldn't sleep with my windows open because of the blaring from the speakers in, and it was 24 hours and so forth. And the blaring of the speakers would come on and stop my peace. I called several times and complained on, and they would turn the speakers down for a day and then it'd go back up. But I think we need to keep in mind the needs of the people and what they want, and keep in mind the fact that if we want to make it a beautiful city, which I think we should, that we need to set some kind of agenda and not just do a bunch of hodgepodge things. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions? Thank you. Okay, anybody else?
Laurie Shepard. I'm on the Planning Commission. I wanted to come today and explain why I voted against this project. In voting for this project to go to C1, at that point in time, the way this was set up when we first voted for it, we would lose control over the ability to set any design guidelines for this property. And subsequent to our vote, we voted for a proposal that would allow us to have a conditional use permit for buildings, commercial buildings in this area over 5,000 square feet. So the larger building would then come before the Planning Commission as a conditional use permit process, if that were approved by your body, which I assume will be coming in the next week or so.
I don't mean to interrupt, Lord, but any development on those streets would have to go to the Planning Commission. That's what that is. 5,000.
But the 5,000 is what you said.
Well, no, that's anything 5,000 in the city on a commercial would have to be, but anyone on these specific streets would have to go regardless if it was 10 square.
Okay, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. My concern was that's very helpful because I was assuming that it would not require the gas station to come before our body for any kind of approval at all. But my biggest concern is that we end up with a retail type center. If you can imagine on Telegraph, the little strip mall where the Payless shoe store is and the little restaurant, there's a little jewelry store there. That is not what I would want in Washington Fields. And it's fine for where that location is on Telegraph, but we can't just have any strip mall type of property here in the Fields. It wouldn't be in character with what we have there. I'm not entirely against commercial. So many times we've had things come before our body. Once it's zoned, we kind of lose control over it. It's zoned C1, then you can have restaurants, you can have gas stations, you can have all of the businesses that come with C1. I'm not sure that a conditional use process would solve this issue for me. I don't know that that would be enough of a control process for us. It still comes before only the Planning Commission, so we as a body vote for it, and you have no control over it after that. So that is my opinion.
So I wonder about the control thing. It's, you look back at the history of it, and the farmers that mostly developed this, the last thing they wanted was the city telling them how to do it. And so you'll see what happened was largely development happened just according to the zoning that existed, and there wasn't a lot of overarching design guidelines and things. Now, fortunately, the developments look very nice, and they were developed according to the guidelines that did exist. But there is no overall community standard down there because of the way it was when it started being developed, which was a bunch of farms and a bunch of different farmers who had different ideas on what they wanted to do. Laurie, in your opinion, is this appropriate for commercial then? Is this a corner where commercial fits? And if not, where else?
In my opinion, it's not an appropriate corner for a gas station. For me, aesthetically, and that's just my opinion. I'm not against commercial there. I had always envisioned something like a farmer's market or something that was open during business hours but not all night. So, and the one thing you said was, fortunately, we've ended up with some well-designed things. But are we going to rely on fortune? I mean, are we? And once we zone it, if it doesn't go through with this owner, the zoning sticks with the property. And so while he has assured us that it will look great, we have now zoned it C1, and another property owner can come in and come up with something that would not be as perhaps as pleasing. So,
we've got a lot of commercial parcels vacant in other parts of the city, and what we're always told by the developers is house tops dictate where they want to build their businesses. And one of the downsides to the Filter being so popular is there's now people that have businesses in mind that they think that's a great place for their business. And I can sympathize with the residents who moved there to get away from everything. That now they feel like they're the attraction point. Right. I don't know how to solve that problem, but it's a challenge.
Right.
It's a challenge.
Right. And I agree with you. It is difficult to figure out how to solve it.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's inevitable that this property goes commercial. My concern, though, is what type of commercial we're going to have there, and that we don't have the ability to say, once it's zone C1, we're very, very limited, even with the conditional use process, on what kind of say we have.
Do you feel like you have say on design as far as, let's say, a preliminary plat were to come through and a design was presented? Do you feel like you have the ability to disapprove that application if the design were not correct?
From what I've seen in our experience, and Drew may disagree with me, but no, I don't. I feel like we have the ability to say, oh, we want more rock on that. We would like more windows on that. We want this to look more farm style. But other than some tweaking and some, minor things, I feel like we don't really have. We certainly can't say, well, you can't put a gas station there, because now that's
a permitted use.
That's a permitted use.
Sort of. I mean, auto service stations are allowed by conditional use permit. There are other uses that are permitted uses, but with the way our ordinance is changing on this road, pretty much everything will be conditional use within the C1 zoning. Sorry.
Right.
Thanks, Laurie. Any other questions for her?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? If not, I'll.
Ryan Robinson, just with a follow-up question, and I don't know, Jeff, if this has been done or not, but just considering that bridge that's going to go in place and the Maverick that's in existence on the other side of that bridge, and knowing the McAfees who hold Old Town and Country gas station, which did not survive, Do we know the demand? Is there surveys that indicate the ability of a gas station to survive in that location, knowing Town and Country did not? And now what does that look like? And knowing that Maverick is going to be even more accessible once the bridge goes in. And I don't know if there are surveys or studies that would indicate that there's enough demand that would prove that gas station would survive or not.
I know there's surveys that'll look at rooftops and just the amount of residences or people that live within those areas, and then those people will never say a gas station would work. Well, a gas station will succeed right here, but they'll say, given the amount of houses that are here, this area would support a commercial use, or this is enough housetops that commercial would be in here in another area. But I've never seen one where they would say, you know what, that gas station will or won't succeed.
Okay. Well, so traffic counts. Just knowing our access to gas stations right now and what's happening with Town and Country and how busy or not busy the 300 East Telegraph gas station is, would just make me wonder what is the likelihood that that gas station will start to look like Old Town and Country.
Yeah. Old Town and Country even had kind of the farm.
They did.
The farm
it had
concept,
the look,
but it didn't keep them in business.
Anyway, I just wanted to
While
voice
you're up
that
here,
question.
Ryan, I've just been trying to imagine another corner in town that maybe would look like this, and the best I'm coming up with is Red Sands Market in Bloomington. Kind of close on the corner with a little bit of an awkward intersection, and then I'm really thinking about the amount of homes that are on opposite corners from it. Can you think of a better one that I'm just trying to conceive how that would look, or maybe something that may be similar to what the proposal is?
I don't know. My wife's from a small town, so when I think about the gas station that's available there, it's away from all things residential. The post office is across the street, and there's still agricultural around it. But it has a convenience or multiple shops that are there by it.
Kind of a little bit of a shopping.
Yeah, but it has a very specific theme for Huntsville, Utah. The post office has a very specific theme for Huntsville, Utah. There's not a lot of businesses in Huntsville, Utah, but those that are there are very specifically themed. Anyway, I don't know. Obviously, not to say that it couldn't happen there, but there's just a lot of things that go with that. The smell, we can smell the cows. That doesn't bother me. My dad grew up on a dairy farm. I know that cleans out your sinuses and it's good for you. That's what I was told growing up.
Vitamin B or something, right?
But gas fumes, no, that's not something I want to smell. It's not something I want to send my kids in the backyard to go play and smell. I know there's controls over that, but we get a lot of wind that come around Nichols Peak, and it comes right up our backyard. So now what's to prevent all the garbage that's supposed to be going in the trash cans at that gas station from blowing in my backyard? Who can I call to come pick it up? I'm picking up the tumbleweeds that end up there. I'd love to see the dirt go away and the tumbleweeds, but I don't want to replace that with garbage or fumes.
Thank you, Ryan.
I have another question for Mr. Reber. What experience does your client have with projects like this, specifically owning, operating gas stations and developing this type of project? Can you tell us at the mic other projects, or is this a first for them?
No. They're not my client, they're Greg's, so he knows them much better than I do, but they own several gas station convenience stores, not just here, but in other areas as well. So this isn't their first rodeo. They've done this several times. They've been successful with all of their projects. This really is driven by economics. Nobody's going to spend the millions of dollars it's going to take to develop this site if they don't think it's going to be successful. That's no guarantee, but in today's world, there is enough information available to really narrow that decision down to a much more accurate basis than what we've seen in the past. So we've spent a long time working with these folks looking for a site, and we came up with this site. They're excited about it. They're convinced that this is going to be a great opportunity for them. I agree with that assessment. I think with the rooftops that are out there, with the growth that's taking place, with the traffic counts on the main roads right there, I think that this will be a great center. I don't, again, they don't want to jump into this if it's not something that's going to be supported by the community. And if the majority of the people out there don't want this there, then it doesn't make any sense to try and make it happen. If the majority of the people do want it there and they're willing to sit down with us and help us in the design so that they're happy with the way that it's set up, then I think it'll be a win-win for everybody. But we're not the type of development group that comes in and tries to do a win-lose scenario where they win and the neighborhood loses. It needs to be a win-win in order to be successful long-term, and that's their plan. Does that help?
Why don't you have your group by the Town and Country?
Pardon?
Why don't you have the group by the Town and Country up on the top of the hill?
I wish.
I've got
It's
some
all
great
about
ideas.
location.
Absolutely.
One last thing I would just say, I mean, it has nothing to do with this project, but I would strongly encourage Washington City to listen to what's been said here, because everything that they're saying, I totally agree with. I think you need to have a narrow set of parameters on design and aesthetics as well as just property types. Now, the C1 zone does incorporate a lot of parameters, but if the concern is an aesthetic theme for this area as well as the rest of Washington City, I've seen lots of cities that have been able to sit down and come up with an aesthetic theme that addresses signage, addresses lighting, addresses even the aesthetic facades of the buildings that are developed in a particular area. And I think that's a great idea long-term for Washington City.
And that's a little bit the concern with this, is we don't have those design guidelines in place at this point. So we're concerned that this
well, and
may
that's
come-
why I'm saying we'll sit down and work with you. And if we can come up with a set of parameters that are consistent enough that they can be applied to other projects, that's great. I mean, that benefits you. You're not going to find a lot of developers that are willing to sit down and work directly not only with the community, but with your planning department and anyone else that wants to help with the input.
Would you be comfortable in that process, working with staff and our planning commission in the design of this project, to have a development agreement that would tie this zone change to design guidelines that we could then use as a springboard for future development in the fields?
Sure.
So that the zoning would essentially revert back to what it was if the development agreement doesn't have acceptable design guidelines. Would you be comfortable with that? Not a complicated agreement, but at least some assurance.
Yeah, I think so. I don't want to get in a situation where we're not only talking about legal logistics that complicate the project, but the costs associated with that and the time. Timing is important in this process. So if we can do that and we can do it quickly and efficiently, then absolutely.
And the second reason to that is we don't want to give us, at least me personally, I don't want to give a C1 zoning and then have that property sold to somebody else who hasn't given these same assurances.
Right.
So I think, I don't know that a development agreement is something we want to get in the habit of using, but I think in this case, I would be more comfortable with something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
I think that's a great
legal
idea.
counsel could work with your group.
I think that's a great idea, and I think tying that maybe to your conditional use process, permitting process, might not be a bad idea long term as well. But just some suggestions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. One more time. Anybody else? Okay, we'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved to close the public hearing.
Have a motion and a second to close our public hearing.
Nice and aye.
Staley, aye.
Sigmiller, aye.
Turek, aye.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to consideration to approve an ordinance zoning, adopting zone change request E-14L5 to change present zone from R112 to C1 zone.
Mayor, if I may just encourage some discussion before we go to a vote or a motion. I know that there's been a lot said tonight about the concept, but I also know that really the concept isn't what we're voting on, it's just the zone change. And I know that the general plan commission that recently reviewed this within just a couple of years. When was this recently changed for the general plan? About 2 years ago, we had a board of people that were none of us here. A bunch of citizens got together and they thought that that was a good corner for commercial. They thought that that was a spot that would merit commercial in that area. And so that's essentially the request tonight, is just to change the zone to conform with the general plan. I do have concerns with the traffic and some of the challenges posed at that corner, though. I don't see a lot of solutions to alleviate it, given the nature that it is. And then I still wonder in my own mind where I think that commercial out there is inevitable at some point, even though everyone has moved there because they love the fact that it was open and not commercial. I'm not sure if there's better spots or worse spots, but I still wonder about where the spots would be, and if this isn't the one that does make the most sense. I don't know if the council has any thoughts or any.
No, I've shared some of those same concerns, especially as I've looked this over. I supported the mortuary down there because I didn't think that it really too negatively impacted the neighborhood that was next to it, because of the type of uses that mortuaries have, usually very quiet, very low light, those types of things. I see this having much more of a negative impact on those citizens there, and so I'm much more torn looking at these types of uses and saying, how does it really impact those citizens now with lighting, 24-hour lighting, gas stations, those types of things that usually happen around gas stations, those types of things. So this has been much more of a challenge for me to wrap my head around and try and support, to be honest with you. The only thing that I guess that even has me leaning towards supporting is the fact the general plan says this is kind of what we general plan for. And so, yeah, I've sat here tonight still torn, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other thoughts or comments?
I think I tend to agree with both the other councilmen, but I think it is inevitable that something happens there, and maybe with the right conditions, it would be all right.
That was my thought. I don't remember who brought up the fact of like a farmer's market or a little neighborhood market. To me, that's fits the neighborhood. That's what we call neighborhood commercial. It's the convenience of the neighborhood. It isn't so much the gas station and the Pepsi's on tap, I guess. But it becomes part of that neighborhood and fulfills the needs of the neighborhood to have of needing a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread and some fresh fruit. I think that, to me, I could support very well, because at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, the lights go out, they close the doors, they go home to the neighborhood, to where gas stations don't do that type of thing. So,
but to be profitable, they probably have to have the full service.
It's interesting because even First Stop, I think the lights go out eventually, don't they? First Stop goes out at 9 or 10. I know that they're. Yeah, First Stop's not 24-hour, which is a little more of a commercial passageway. As we're sitting here just talking, there's a gas station kind of in the center of Ivins City that's surrounded directly by homes, and there's a little bit of a strip mall kind of up the street from it, but two different little commercial things that are right inside of residential there. And I was just thinking in my mind how well I think those fit. I'm sure the residents don't think they fit very well. I know I've driven past and observed them. For my part, I feel like I have the ability to vote no on a plat that comes through that doesn't have the design or hasn't tried to accommodate my concerns about design or build. I feel like I have the ability to vote no on that. And so I'm less concerned about the zone change because I still reserve the right to vote no there now.
Councilman Sigler, the issue with this one, though, is the next step on this is a conditional use permit, which is up to our land use body, which is the Planning Commission. So we wouldn't see this again. However, they would discuss all of those issues. Do we want to allow gas? Do we want to prohibit gas? What conditions do we want to put on the property, on the uses there? But we most likely would not see this again unless it was just a review of a development agreement, if that's something that we decide to incorporate into any motion that's made tonight.
A lot to think about. Anybody want to entertain a motion? Do we want to discuss it some more?
Has there ever been, Council Starkey, a development agreement at the zoning stage?
Yeah.
We can implement it wherever.
And I'm not quite sure how we're contemplating that. I mean, just right out of the gates, my biggest concern is, not my biggest concern, but the limiting factors I think are going to be, in order to consider the zone, if the zone change is going to be tied to specific development standards, other type of things on the change and on the land itself, I don't know how you would approve it without actually having that agreement, those major terms of design there to lock it in. I mean, that's I'm not sure I'd contemplate that even, or even from some of the neighbors would say, well, I came to the hearing before and all I thought was going to be C1. I didn't expect it to be what in effect would be a newly defined kind of zone. I mean, I don't have any problem with the idea. I like the idea.
Well,
I never have a problem with that.
And it may be a bit of a stretch, but the thought process behind it, from my standpoint, is there's been an occasion or two in my tenure on the council where a zone change has been granted with promises that it would be built out in a certain way, and then those don't come to fruition for one reason or another, or the property is sold. And so I guess I'm just looking for some assurances that this group here can live up to the promises that are on the record, and maybe that's good enough that they're on the record, that when this comes back to the Planning Commission and that those promises are there and weigh into their ultimate decision.
Well, I think we're really serious about it. Well, one, I don't think this is whatever those development kind of restrictions or guidelines would be that would be incorporated into this land. Again, I don't have a problem with development agreements and tying it to, I mean, basically every PUD we do is one of those. But we would have to know really what the elements we're looking at right now before we approve the change, I think. I mean, if we had an idea right now what those restrictions would be that we could articulate, that would start making it easier. I don't know how we do it without kind of have an idea what those elements are and what those restrictions might be, because even what I've heard tonight from the representative of the developer, I mean, I wouldn't be real comfortable as the body that approved that, thinking that we were locking in something, because they were so general. I mean, they were really just kind of general. I promise we'll do this. I promise we'll work with somebody. Again, we always believe people. I'm sure they always say that with truthfulness. But when the rubber
Council
hits the
Starkey,
road,
there's a state statute that promises that they'll work with us too, right?
Yeah.
So we know how that works.
That's an inside joke,
the best
folks.
scenario on that would be we would probably, at the best scenario, the best and the shortest ability to do that is that we'd have to table it and bring it back with at least the basics of
what if we had the conditional use permit approval come back to this body in this case?
Yeah, I don't think we can because our ordinance don't read that way. Yeah.
Well, if I can shed it, I don't want to bring it up, but if you read the conditional use permit, there is an appeal process, and it says any person aggrieved by the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal to the City Council. I mean, it's straight flat out in our ordinance.
Yeah, as far as that goes. I mean,
if they pass it, you don't like the looks, you're any person, even though you're a city councilman, you're still a citizen and any person. If you felt that they passed something you didn't like, I think you'd have every right to make an appeal to the City Council.
Yeah. The cities have done that. They've appealed, the City Councils have appealed the decision that their planning commissions have made before.
Inactive
Might be a
city
little odd
council.
if you're the one appealing it and it comes to you on the appeal.
Now that I know that I can start appealing the planning commission, I
Yeah.
might have to start going to their meetings.
Well, yeah,
I'm just teasing.
that might be
You have
problematic.
been to their meetings.
I don't think it's, I don't necessarily telling you, that we could appeal, as a city council, appeal what they did, knowing that we're the appeal body. There might be some issues there, as far as that goes.
See,
But,
What cities have done that, and they have done that, it just bounces to the next appellate body.
right. So it can be done. I agree with what was said, especially right here, and that is, if we want some specific standards out there for the field, because it is such a different area, we really, even aside from this one, we got to start hitting that, so we're not doing this every time. Neighborhood commercial, when I hear neighborhood commercial, you keep thinking it's going to be a farmer's market or something nice and cozy and
That's what everybody
fluffy.
thinks, and then they
That
get a family
opens
dollar.
at 10 and closes at 5.
Yeah.
The problem is, our neighborhood commercial doesn't define it that way. If it doesn't define it that way, it's just a nice term.
Yeah, that was
Doesn't
my
get us
thought as
right.
I thought about this with neighborhood commercials. That's probably one thing that we really ought to look at is defining or refining what our neighborhood commercial really is.
Does that mean something
I'd be
more than
real-
just commercial, which is really what it means?
I'd be real interested in seeing if we could come to a consensus on, maybe we just say the consensus at this point is for commercial zone request in the Fields area, and we'd have to define what that means, because clearly there's commercial just down the road. I mean, there's not commercial very far from here. But for commercial zone that fits within an area that we define as the Fields or the developable areas there, if we could come to a consensus on a list of kind of standards and design guidelines that we'd like to have, I'd feel a lot more comfortable before we start approving these zone changes.
I mean, a short list is, that we're working on a better, more refined one, is still better than nothing. Because it sounds like we kind of have the same questions every time on the neighborhood commercial and the field. And that, signs, lighting, hours, what type of uses are too intense, the materials done with it and how it blends. I mean, there's things we could do on a short list without taking 12 months to come up with a great set of guidelines. It would still address some of the bulk and the big ticket items, I think. I mean, I haven't looked at it, I don't want to speak for truth off it, but it seems like we come up with a good short list is better than no list, and that's where we're moving.
I think you're hitting on the top areas of that list, and the residents have hit on those same ones. Maybe add a little bit about how they buffer from a direct zone change line, but.
Well, that really would be the preferred method, because under the Land Use Act, it's built so that there's this process that you don't change or adjust each time a landowner applies. And probably in fairness to the landowner too, I mean, you've had many, or at least a couple, projects come before, and we kind of have the same thing, and the landowner's saying, well, I meet the general plan intent of neighborhood commercial, and so it should indicate that I would be able to receive that zone. And that's where we do have to be careful that, and that's what the Land Use Act is about in the state, is that we do follow a fair process like that. And the fair process is we establish the rules as much as we can in the front end and not try to change it case by case as it comes along, because the property rights, which everybody has to appreciate, is really at the heart of what we're talking about here.
And I know that's also the area where you and staff get put into a pickle, because on its face, it conforms. And so.
And the statute in the state is that there is a presumption of approval. Yeah. The statute in the state is that if they meet the intents of these things, they should be approved. It even states that. And so we are an evidenced staff, and so we have to kind of go that route. But it's the council that gets these legislative discussions.
Well, and as a council, we've been very consistent on that.
Yeah.
We have not deviated from the process, not very often, at least since I've been here.
No, I'm saying, and if this doesn't fit like a neighborhood commercial that the council is perceiving right now, the best way to deal with it is deal with it on that level, instead of trying to then, as they come in piece by piece, to try to adjust them.
Deal with it on that level before we give a zone approval, before we.
Right, yeah, that's the safest.
And then bring it back once we've got that dealt with and see if it conforms with the council's wish.
That's the most equitable under the statute.
Let's don't forget, we have agricultural owners who have held this. I mean, let's don't just forget the fact that the reason the fields are what they are is because we have a lot of owners of agricultural land who kept that agriculture for a really long time. And as they come to the point in their generation decisions that it's now time. We can't keep them a farm anymore. And it may have drawn people there, but those people that have had farms, they have the right to come back and now move that into the land that's more productive than just farmland too. And that's I think that's difficult. Be putting special obligations on them because they were farmers before. Now they have different requirements than somebody else that just owns land downtown somewhere. So I think we always need to take consideration the property rights of all the parties involved, including those that own that agricultural land for years and now want to sell it.
Yeah, prime example of that I can think of, because I know it well, is Chandler, Arizona. If you've ever been there to what it is now and what it used to be back when I was in high school, it was even more rural than our fields were by far. You go to Chandler, Arizona now, Intel has come in and built this city basically just with their business, and then everything else has followed, and Chandler's anything but farming and rural, now. But it's just an evolution of that, as Jeff was saying. They held on and held on and held on, and time changed.
It seems to me neighborhood commercial, the term itself, sounds more existing residential owner friendly than I think in reality it is. It makes it sound like it's going to be something really nice and conform and everybody will love it out there. The reality is the term itself isn't defined in a way to make it that way though. So if we were going to lock conditions in by a development agreement, I would suggest at the very least, we at least table it for another meeting, just so we can at least get the basic elements that we were going to do there. I think the longer game is we got to start addressing it so every time a neighborhood commercial in the fields comes up, we have a good kind of at least a better idea of what we want to do overall.
I agree. We need more details before we can really say development agreement. We need to see if we can agree on what we want those standards to be. I think we can. I think the city council can come to terms on what they.
And maybe you have an idea right now that's good enough that's easy to put out there, and that I'm not sure the representative tonight could even agree to it, since they're not necessarily the property owner anyway. I got to tell you, the end of the day, the property owner's got to prove it because it's his land his or her land to be locked into.
Well,
they may be able to do that.
One of my concerns was that if we allow this zoning and then this particular developer doesn't go through with it, that the property is sold. This particular developer has indicated that he would be more than happy to not only implement some of these design guidelines, but help establish design guidelines that would set a base for future development there. I think in the meantime, if we did approve it, we as a council could also charge the Planning Commission to give us some quick recommendations on some design guidelines that we might implement, so that if this property is developed by somebody else or future properties come, then we have that in place and we're not behind in the process anymore. I don't have a reason not to believe that he wouldn't try to accommodate those as we develop them out.
I can tell you, I don't know if it's been on a zone change or it's been on another land use issue. So this is long, 15, 20 years ago. But we've approved certain things at a time. Basically, we had the process. We're in the middle of the process. We already have pending ordinances where we're trying to come up with new guidelines. And as new applicants would come in, what they had agreed, knowing the process was being worked on, they had agreed that they would submit to any new requirements of that zone as they were approved.
Okay.
Again, we've done it before. At the time, it was different because we were in the middle of a process, and we were taking. And again, it was kind of risky because I'm not really sure legally if we could tie him to that, but it was better than nothing at the time. I don't know if it's the same here because we aren't even in the process right now.
Yeah, this would
and that's a different. Well, yeah, clearly we've had the ordinance issue.
Okay, we ready to move forward or table it, or any suggestions?
Mayor, I think through the discussion in the public hearing, I'm going to make a motion that we table consideration of approving the ordinance zone change request Z-14-05 to change the present zone from sorry, that's the wrong one. From R112, no, it is the right one, from R112 to the C1 zone, which is known as community commercial. And I'll just make the comment on that motion to table has nothing to do with the application that's before us as much as it has to do with the stated desire both from the council and the public that we come up with some standards and some guidelines that we'd like to have future zone requests be guided by.
Your motion to table, what, for 2 weeks to the next meeting?
I would give it 4 weeks so that maybe at the next meeting in 2 weeks we can discuss and maybe resolve on the standards and then bring the item back at the subsequent meeting. I think in 2 weeks is going to be too quick to both consider and reach agreement on the standards and approve or consider the zoning.
And even at that, the idea would be you're going to try to develop something for this property specifically. It may start the process as a whole, but when it comes back again to say, we would approve that zone change with the following conditions attached to it, by then we'd have to have the landowner themselves also agree to that as a process, is what you're thinking?
My thought is there not a way that we could approve in the subsequent meeting, but not connected to this request, a set of guidelines that would govern any request for a zone change to commercial within a certain area in the fields?
We'd have to hold public hearings. Planning commission would have to make recommendations. So you're talking 2 or 3 months just because we got to come up with them and then run it through the process.
That's blasphemous. That's why I said, is part of the thinking that would start the process for the overall, but in the meantime, maybe within 4 weeks you have some very specific ones that the landowners are willing to agree to.
I think I would do what you're suggesting is that would give us time to engage with the applicant, see if they're even willing to if they even want to continue the application.
Yeah, for what you want, the development agreement would be the better tool in this case.
Is what they would be thinking.
Yeah.
Development agreement type of that.
As long as they're fine with it, you're fine with it, that'd be the best vehicle for this particular case, would be that, a development agreement.
Any type of a guideline right now to approve it with it and say, with these guidelines, we're going to become a development agreement, which we're then going to talk to landowners, see if they'd agree. I think it makes much more sense if we're moving that way. Table it, try to get together with the landowner, have you guys maybe work with the plan, come up with some ideas to start that would be good to lock into this particular one so they could be considered with the zone change.
Yeah, I think that's the only one that makes sense. And so I will amend my motion so that it's clear that the motion to table is, I'm going to stick with the timeline that I said. We'll table this item so it's out, not at the subsequent meeting, but the next one, the July 9th meeting. That'll give us time to at least see whether the applicant's even interested in engaging that type of a discussion. Okay. And if they are, whether we can discuss with them and come to an agreement. And then I think it would be along the lines of what Councilman Staley suggested. If we can, it would be couched in a development agreement that would at least have a concept and have some specificity at the subsequent hearing when this will come back up.
That's the best chance you have of trying to do what it sounds like we want to try to do on this particular. Otherwise, you do exactly what you're worried about, and that is, oh, they said they'd do it, we'll believe it, but.
Yeah, and Councilman Staley's right. We hear a lot of those. Sometimes they do it, and sometimes they don't.
Right.
I'll second his motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second.
Nice and aye.
Staley, nay.
Segmiller, aye.
Turek, aye.
Okay, that passes 3-1. We'll move on. Item 8, discussion regarding the John D. Lee statue placed on the empty pedestal in front of the museum. George Staley.
I'd like to thank the council for the opportunity to visit with you about this. I'm the president of the Historical Society, and I was asked by the board members to present our request. I'm very interested in Washington City and the history of Washington City. How did I get familiar with the Mountain Meadow Massacre? I want to tell you because I think it's very important that you know where my feelings come from. About 15 years ago, they had a meeting with members out here in southern Utah and those people from Missouri and Airborne. At that time, they were trying to talk about how do we resolve the mysteries and the questions that arise with John D. Lee and the Mountain Meadow Massacre. About that same time, I had heard some talks from Bort Anderson, but his was on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And then I heard Dr. Brooks talk about how Juanita got involved and the Mountain Meadow Massacre. I was teaching history at that time to students that had a very hard time resolving conflict. So as what I did is I got Bort Anderson to come over after I showed Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I got him to come over and talk about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in reality. And there's really a conflict between the way the movie was filmed and how it portrayed Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and what they really were. You know, the movie really kind of glorified them. They were these great people that were having fun and did all these things. Bort Anderson didn't portray them that way. Dr. Brooks portrayed the conflict around the Mountain Meadow Massacre of why and why it happened. And so now I had two different things that I could talk about. Why are certain things portrayed the way they are, and how do you resolve conflict? And so we would study history about both things, and then we would talk about the resolution of how you'd solve the conflict. And they were completely two different stories when you really know what went on and how they evolved. Is that one conflict, was terrible. The Mountain Meadow Massacre was terrible. And I'll bring up some things later on, but that was just kind of a background how I started to study and read a lot about the Mountain Meadow, and then I started reading the other books about John D. Lee and the Red Hills of November, and I Was Called to Dixie and the Joshua Tree, so I could find out as much as I could so I could really present two sides of the story. And the kids would get mad at me because every 15 minutes I'd change sides. One time I'd be for this person, and one time I'd be for those people. Mr. Staley, why are you doing that to us? Because I really want you to understand the complete picture so that you can resolve in your mind what is the best thing. And this is how you resolve conflict, is by understanding the whole story. And I don't think any of us are ever going to understand the whole story of John D. Lee. As much as I've read, I don't know that I will. But I want to start with a little bit of about 12 to 15 years ago, Washington City Council, members of the Historical Society, felt like history was important enough to spend, I think, probably $250,000 on building a monument plaza so that residents of Washington could understand what those people went through and how they sacrificed so that we can have the beautiful community that we have. After several months of talking, they came up with 55 people that they should honor in the early pioneers of Washington. 5 of them that were major contributors and 50 of them that were here and did a lot for the community. So they had 5 7-foot bronze statues commissioned by Jerry Anderson at about $35,000 a piece and 50 medallions. So the council at that time felt like it was important that Washington City understands their ancestors, so that people today can appreciate and do things that we should be doing for the growth of Washington City. They was a long process. It took a couple of years, and at that time, everybody felt good about all of the statues. I think most everybody that was on that committee had read Juanita Brooks's Mountain Meadow because they were kind of history buffs. And so the conflict of the Mountain Meadow, even though it was a tragedy, the conflict that John D. Lee, how he was involved, was not a real concern to them because they were able to read and understand historians that had written factually about John D. Lee. So in their mind, there wasn't a conflict. And I don't know when, but several weeks is the best I can understand before the monuments were to put up. There was some people in town and other places that felt like John D. Lee should not go up. And they started a campaign to see that he didn't. This was about 10 years ago. So subsequently, the council voted at that time 3-2 not to put the monument up. Now, it is my understanding that one of the council or several of the council got death threats if they voted for it. I don't understand how anybody could be that deranged to give a councilman a death threat over a monument going up. And I'm serious about that. They would have to be deranged. The councilman told my son, he was on the council, that voted against it. He says, I wish I would have never done it. I gave up my liberty, I gave up my freedom when I listened to a death threat, and it wasn't worth it. We do give up our liberty and we do give up our freedom if we don't understand the whole picture of why. And if we are concerned about people giving us death threats and we change our mind because of that, we give up our freedom. And I hope that we don't give up our freedom, but if you're really against it, I hope you vote against it. If you're really for it, I hope that you vote for it.
Just to be clear, George, I've had no threats whatsoever.
Well, I'm not sending any councilman here.
So I don't think that's happened this time.
No, and I appreciate that. And I was really quite forward in bringing it so that, you'd know several weeks ahead what we're going to do. A little bit of history before we... Let me give you now a little bit of background about the statue itself. As you know, Jerry Anderson got it back and it was sold to the Lee family. They were going to put it up at Fort Harmony because that's where he was. That project kind of went through. So we were contacted by members of the Lee family, the Washington Historical Society was, and asked us if we would, if we wanted it back. I took the proposal to the city, to the board of the Historical Society before I said yes. I'd talked to Dr. Brooks, who's now would have been here, but he's in a rest home, and Carla's in New York. They both said they'd come to the council meeting because they felt really bad when it wasn't up, and both of them said it should be there in Washington. And so I talked to them, and I said the city council might not give it back. The place for us to put it, it's their choice because it's their property. And they said, well, there's other places in town that it can go up. I then talked to several other people that in the Lee family and said, how do you feel about it? Because you might get some negative reaction toward your family. And they said, we've got a lot of negative reaction before. We would really like to see it go up in Washington City. And so we did that, and we had it was proposed in our board meeting at Washington City Historical Society that it be brought to the council. everyone that was there that night voted for it. And so I came to a work meeting, kind of presented it, because I didn't want it sprung on the community overnight, you know, and I think it was been publicized. I wanted it last week, but I was going to be in Idaho. I went home and says, Kathy, we're going to do it this week. And she says, you've got to be in Idaho that week. So I called the mayor and he changed it to this week, which I appreciate. So that was about 10 years ago. A couple of days ago, an article came out in the paper. When that article, I was planning on just coming in, giving a short presentation tonight, because I felt like the conflict has been talked about. I would hope that you on the city council would have read about it, because read the history of John D. Lee, so that you really understand where the conflict is coming from. I don't know if you did or you didn't. I don't know. But I felt like after some of the things in the paper were said, I felt like I had to go into the presentation a little bit more. I would have been done by now if this hadn't come out. There was a couple of things. The first thing that was said in the paper is that the sentiment probably is the same now. Nobody's changed their mind. I think a lot of people have changed their mind, and I think some people haven't changed their mind. I'm sure there's people in this group that are dead set against having the statue up. I'm sure that there's people in this group today that don't even know about the conflict, and there's people in this group that are very adamant, like myself, that the statue should go up in its rightful place in the Monument Park. I got a letter from a resident. Kenny, this is your neighbor, and she just brought this after, you know, the paper. And I'm going to read just 2 paragraphs. It's a 2-page letter, a very good letter, but I just want to read the first paragraph and the last paragraph. Since I kept quiet last time when the issue of John D. Lee's statue came up, I was sorry. This time I will stand up and be counted. That's the first paragraph. And then she goes in and tells about all of the things that she's read about John D. Lee, all the books that she's read, and how she's came to the conclusion that she's came from, and you know, the 2-page. And then her last paragraph says this: what I appreciate about John D. Lee is what he did for Washington in those years when he lived here. Washington is a unique and special town. John D. Lee helped bring that about. I would be very pleased to see him in his rightful place in the Statue Park. The last 2 days, I don't get out much. I go from my house down to my business and work and back. You know, I'm an old man. But when I went to the gas station to get a Coke, you know, like they do down, if it's going to be downtown or wherever it is, I've had several people come up and says, I'm glad you're bringing this up. I was quiet last time. If I could be there, I would be there, but they can't. One person that told me that, and I was really surprised who it was, Brother Larson. He came and he said, I've got to go. I didn't think it would take this long. And he was very supportive. I was over to St. George today. 2 different people saw me and says, oh, your name was in the paper. And I says, well, how do you feel about it? And both of them were sad that it wasn't up there. Not residents of Washington, you know, but they were sad. Another thing that I thought was funny that was in the paper, I'm going to read the little quote. I'm not going to ask for clarification, but I didn't understand it. I am not sure. Oh, excuse me. It goes. That was the one that I just talked about. It says, I have nothing to do. It has nothing to do with the person. And then it goes on to say, but I don't want him in front of our building. If you've seen the statue, you'd want him in front of your building. If you don't have anything to do with the person, then you must be against the statue. But it's beautiful, so I can't see how you could be against the statue. You can't be not against the person and have him up, and not have him up, unless it's an ugly statue, and it's not. Jerry Anderson did a great job. It's a beautiful statue. Now, I realize that the conflict comes from his perceived involvement in the Mountain Meadow, which I think we have to talk about. I think that we all agree, from what I presented last time and your feelings, that he did a lot for Washington City. He was on the commission. He was very industrious. He took in the poor. He helped the Indians. He did all those things. So I think as far as what he did for Washington City, we don't even have to discuss, because he did so many great things. In the 13 years that he lived here longer than probably any place else, unless it was when he was young. But in his adult life, he lived here and developed this community for 13 years. Had a beautiful mansion up here, one block up, on the other side of the street. So I don't think there's any questions about that. But I would like to talk about the Mountain Meadow. And when we talk about the Mountain Meadow, I think that I'm going to talk basically about John D. Lee's role in the Mountain Meadow. I want to start off by saying that the Mountain Meadow was probably the worst tragedy that ever happened in Mormon history. I agree with that. It was terrible the way it was conducted. Let's look at some of the facts about John D. Lee, not about much else, but just about him. He was the Indian Agency down here, and he was also a major in the Mormon militia in southern Utah. We don't know for sure whether he was in the early planning of the Mountain Meadow or not. And the conflict, was resolution I talked to the kids about, so I've got a definite opinion the way I feel about the conflict and how it happened. But that's neither here nor there. It did happen. But anyway, he was assigned by his superior in the militia, who was a stake president, Haight, that he was to carry out the plan. Now, the plan basically was to involve the Indians and to do some other things that were not really, in my opinion, proper. But he, being a person that was honorable and followed his commanding officers, and he might have had influence in saying how it was going to be done, that's not really understood in the histories that I've read. So anyway, he and another went under the truce of a white flag. And after being convinced, because some of those migrants had already been killed by the Indians in other ways coming down through, he convinced them that they would protect him and help them get out of the Mountain Meadow. But they were to surrender their guns at that time. Now, history tells what happened next. And the militia went down into the meadow and marched along the side of each person. And who gave the commandment to shoot the person by him, I don't know. But what was John D. Lee's involvement after he had initiated the agreement? John D. Lee and Mr. Knight drove the two wagons with the children that were saved. He wanted the children saved, those that they felt like couldn't talk. And they drove those children up to Jacob Hamlin's summer home, which is up in Pinto. And he felt responsible for those kids, and he adopted one and got the rest of them back with their family in Missouri when he could. Now, I had one question asked me about kind of last week, and Garth, I'll direct this to you because you had a question about the booty, the things that were taken, that certain things were you told. 5 days after the massacre, several people went north to Brigham Young. When they got there, they talked about what should we do with the things that we've got. And they had talked about it, and Brigham Young directed John D. Lee. He says, because you are the Indian agent down there, you will determine how things will be spread up. This came right from Brigham Young. And there were only several communities down here at that time: Washington, New Harmony, Cedar, Parowan, and those were divided up amongst those communities and people in the community and the Indians. So, you know, I hope that gives you a better understanding of why he did what he did. It was kind of a gentleman's agreement to not to tell any names of what happened. John D. Lee at this time was living in New Harmony. A couple of years later, he moved to Washington, built his house up on the corner of 100 East and 200 North. It was a mansion that he entertained people all the time with, and I don't need to go into that. But, you know, for several years there wasn't much said. And then newspaper people from back east and the federal government and non-Mormon newspapers in Salt Lake started to ask questions. What happened? The church really was involved about the Mormon Meadow. The church is responsible for what happened. You know, and nobody had really talked about what was going on or what would happen. But we do know that Brigham Young had sent a message down that didn't get here till after the massacre had taken place. And so it started to stir up problems for the church. The church didn't know how to handle it. It was getting a lot of negative press because of the massacre. The Deseret was talking about becoming a state. The federal government says we've got to clear this mess up before we become a state. And so a lot of these things were happening, and, you know, people kind of lived, and John D. Lee lived a very normal life here in Washington. Loved, respected, doing all those things that you do. Then, probably the hardest thing that ever happened to John D. Lee is that the church decided to excommunicate him. That was hard. And after he was excommunicated, I'd like to read a paragraph from Juanita Brooks's article. Thus it was, so far as official church records were concerned, the entire blame of the massacre was shifted to the shoulders of John D. Lee. Now, this was about 12 years after the massacre occurred, simply because they needed to get it off their shoulders. The state, to become a state, it was one of the requirements. The entire blame of the massacre was shifted to the shoulders of John D. Lee by his former friends in early 1872. He moved at the order of Brigham Young to the ferry on the Colorado River. And then it says, with the excommunication from the church, John D. Lee's whole life pattern changed. Before, he owned land, cattle, sheep, houses in Harmony, an impressive stone mansion at Washington, whose spacious rooms were ample to entertain the best of Mormon gentry. Now he had a tiny cottage in one of the loneliest spots on earth. It is said about John D. Lee that anybody that was in sound of his dinner bell when it rang, rich, poor, what, could come in and sit at his table to eat. Now he was ostracized by his friends. The blame was put on him. As he went out to the river to Lee's Ferry, he never lost faith. He says, I might be excommunicated, but I'm still a faithful Mormon. Side note, the president of the church reinstated all of his priesthood blessings. And so they feel like that he could not have been a mass murderer, even though he was convicted, which I'm going to in a few minutes, if they reinstated all of his priesthood blessings, because you know that you cannot have your priesthood blessings if you are convicted or if you are a murderer. A few years out, 1874, he went up to Panguitch to see his family, realizing he had a big family that loved him. 19 wives, 10 by who he had children of. They're the most, he has more ancestors active ancestors in the church today than anyone. He was a loyal man, a faithful man. 74, he was arrested in Panguitch, and he had his first trial. In his first trial, there was 8 members of the church, 3 non-members, and 1 Jack Mormon, according to Juanita Brooks. After the trial, it was a split decision, and I'm not going to try to disillusion you. All 8 members of the church voted that he was innocent. The other 4 voted that he was guilty. But after that trial, things started to change. Things started to change. The word that was going around started to change. That somebody had to accept the guilt for the massacre. And so the whisperings were that John D. Lee did this, and John D. Lee did that, and John D. Lee was the one that was wrong. Before his second trial, an agreement was made that all of the members that were out there, which he never divulged any names or talked about anybody, would not be tried if he was found guilty. Now think about that. He could have started naming names. He could have started doing a lot of things. Yes, he went down with the white flag, but he did not fire a shot. He was taking the little children out of there. He cried when he saw one of the people in the wagon group get killed. The Indians called him crybaby because of that. At that trial, they had 12 members of the church. And this time, all 12 voted to convict John D. Lee for the massacre at Mountain Meadow. He was taken to Mountain Meadow and shot, fell in a casket, taken to Parowan, and then to Kanab, where he is dead. I'd like to read one more quote from Juanita Brooks's book. With the execution of John D. Lee, a soup of justice, the fair of Mountain Meadow was considered closed. People in southern Utah could resume the tender of their life, free at last from disturbing pricks of the social consciousness. For had not Lee been punished, their leaders were vindicated. The other men who had participated, scattered in other parts of the territory or in other states, passed the years in security and honor. Among neighbors who would never guess that they could have any connection between these men and the bloody murder at Mountain Meadow. Many authors use the word scapegoat. I don't know that I want to use the word scapegoat. I want to use the word loyal honorable, honest, and standing up for his church, realizing what might happen if the massacre had not have happened. I'm not saying it or justifying it that, but the consequences could have been much worse with Johnson's army coming and etc. I've got, you're worried about the way people think of a monument. I'd like you to give each one of you this. Chris, my eyes aren't very good. Did you read what it says on this monument? Johnny Lee was at least fired for only a few years, but he went right on being the same type of person that you just had. This is a monument at Lee's Ferry, building 61. I don't know that it's ever been defaced or anybody's ever talked bad about this monument. Would you read what? It's hard to read, and my eyes aren't good enough. You see that little bit down there, Chris? You don't need to read very long. Start at the top where it says Lee's Ferry.
Lee's Ferry, northern gateway to Arizona for 54 years, from 1873 to 1927, is located 6 miles upstream from this bridge. This monument, erected to the founder John Doyle Lee, who, with the superhuman effort and in the face of almost insurmountable obstacles, maintained this ferry, which made possible the colonization of Arizona. Frontiersman, trailblazer, builder, a man of great faith, sound judgment, and indomitable courage.
That's what the state of Arizona wrote about John D. That's the way John D. Lee should be pictured in our minds now. A very loyal, humble, servant of the Lord, servant of Brigham Young, faithful in the church. It's with honor and pride that as president of the Historical Society, I present this to the council. And I'd like to read it. I think there's enough there for each one of you. The Washington City Historical Society would like to receive permission from the Washington City Council to place a statue of John D. Lee in the Monument Plaza along with early Washington pioneers. The Washington City Historical Society will pay expenses for the placing of the statue. Signed, George Staley, President, and then every one of the board of members that was at the meeting that night. Some board members have not signed this. They weren't there, and there was some out of town when I decided yesterday that I better get this. There's at least 3 more that would have signed this that were at that meeting, but they're not in town right now. Are there any questions that I can entertain at this time? I know there's some opposition here, and I'd like to have the opportunity to rebuttal any at the end. I know I've taken a lot of your time, but if we're going to resolve conflict, we have to know the history. His statue in the Washington City most beautiful monument park will give members of this community the opportunity to discuss a great person, in my opinion. Even though he was involved in the Mount Meadow, I understand why those people that read honestly the books that Juanita Brooks wrote and the 2 new ones that Turley and Roundy just wrote, because the church opened up all of the records of John D. the Mountain Meadow Massacre, they come to the same conclusions. Those 2 authors that have just written books in the last several years. I'm thankful to Bart Anderson and Dr. Brooks who got me involved in this, not because of what's happening today, but so that I could have the opportunity to teach a lot of students how to resolve conflict. And with my kids, we've talked about it. And I think every one of them in my family, have had questions about the conflict and what has happened. but every one of my siblings would be honored also to have John D. Lee next to their direct ancestor, Peter Nielsen. He's not my direct ancestor, but my kids he is. And we go to the monument place and take our kids there and our grandkids there, and we talk about the things that those people did. Thanks for your consideration. I appreciate it. Any questions?
Any questions for George? Okay, thank you. Now, hold on, folks. Hold on. Thank you for your interest. I'm just curious. Straw vote. How many are for putting that statue up? How many are against it? Okay. We will entertain some comment.
I'd just like to clear up.
Please say.
I would like to just.
We need your name.
Kenneth Dick Lee. I'm the great-great-grandson of John D. Lee.
Put the microphone there. There we go.
I say I'm the great-great-grandson of John D. Lee. There's a few things. History has kind of strung this along for a lot of years. Because of history and because of the internet, you have an opportunity to go and review everything from church history to state history to your city history. Everything you want to review, you can get it. But some of the things that you haven't brought up, it's hard for us. I'm 78 years old. And I'm looking back, John D. Lee would now be 202 years old. In 1857, he was 45 years old. And today we're talking about stuff that was 157 years old. Many of us can't even comprehend what happened back then. Some of the things I would like to reflect on that did happen. I didn't write a speech to come here. I made a few notes here if I can get them. I'd like to go back to 1850. We were not a democracy back then. We were a thermocracy. You understand, don't you? Okay, we were controlled by the church. Brigham Young was a prophet. He was also the governor of the state of Utah. You done what you were told to do. But anyway, from the year of 1857, things happened. We declared war on the United States. We burned their wagons. We'd done a lot of cruel things. We also told all of our people in Salt Lake City and the surrounding towns. In Salt Lake City, they were instructed to burn their homes and to leave it if the army came in. They sent people from the church and from the state government down here to get the people stirred up over the army coming in here. It's an unfortunate thing that the Fletcher group came through the state at that time, or the territory. But we knew, the church knew, and the people knew. There were 6,000 people in Salt Lake Valley at that time. And when you have a wagon train the size of the Fletchers that passes through Salt Lake with 500-600 head of cattle, you know they're there. Now, I have lived with this all my life, from 18 years of age, and I've heard all these stories about what has happened. It's true, John D. Lee was at the massacre. George Albert Smith came down here just a week or so before this massacre happened. He sent instructions not to give a kernel of salt to these folks when they passed through here. There had to be disturbance if you're coming through a country and you're looking for supplies and you can't get them. Sure, there's going to be some conflict on both sides, from the Mormons and from the Fletchers. You're not going to starve to death while you're going through here. So the decision was made at that time. Even Jacob Hamlin had taken all the chiefs from here in the southern part of the state to meet with Brigham Young. At that time it was discussed to have them join to fight the army when they came through here. I have some notes that when this massacre happened, John D. Lee was in New Harmony just trying to do his own thing, and that was run his farm. But he was sent for to come to Cedar City by Haight. Haight and Dane had already discussed this subject of the Mountain Meadow Massacre. John D. Lee was told, because he was a major in the Danites or the Nauvoo Legion, that he was to take and go and try and settle down these Indians. There had been trouble before, right in Cedar, Parowan, and so forth, as this Fletcher train passed through here. Now, I'm not for or against this statue, but I will stand here as a grandson of John D. Lee. He's been put through an awfully lot, and there's been a lot of torture for our family, and I have to look back on it, and I have to look at the fact that John D. Lee was adopted son of Brigham Young. I have to look back on it that he joined the church and came through Far West. He came through Illinois, through Nauvoo. He came through the winter quarters. He came through summer quarters. He was done what he was told to do. As adopted son of Brigham Young, he done what he was supposed to do. He went to the Mountain Meadow Massacre. It got out of trouble, and I don't think there's any man on the face of the earth can tell you the truth of what happened there. That it did happen. The only thing that did cause so much trouble after that is we had a president by the name of Buchanan. And he came in 1957 over this struggle to try and settle things. Well, what happened in the end of that result? Brigham Young, the authorities of the church, and 50,000 people were pardoned by President Haight. You don't hear anything about that, about the pardon. But it still persisted. There wasn't much they can do. I could read you a little statement that's kind of interesting here. This was from President Lincoln, and what it says is this: President Lincoln versus Brigham Young. Now you can read this. You can pull it up on the internet or your iPad. You can read all this. Anybody can read it. It's out there. But he did pardon, as I said, and he did pardon Brigham Young, and you can read this. He did pardon 50,000 people, but it didn't end. President Buchanan had made a terrible mistake. Congress was all over him because of this problem, that it hadn't been cleared up and settled, this massacre. So what happened? Somebody had to take the blame. Some way it had to put to rest. It was either going to come down on Brigham Young or it was going to come down on the church. You can pick which one you think it would come. But it had to happen. There's nothing that Buchanan or the Congress could do about this because he had already pardoned Brigham Young. He had already pardoned these citizens. But it still had to be settled. The Congress was still coming back on them. So what happened is somebody had to take the blunt. They couldn't put it on Brigham Young. They couldn't put it on the church. You couldn't put it on 50,000 people in the territory because they had been pardoned. So what would you do if John D. Lee was adopted son of Brigham Young? And who would you go to? He was sincere. Brigham Young trusted him and everything he'd done from far west to Utah to everywhere else. So he done what he was instructed to do. It had to be settled, or else it was going to come down on the church, in our opinion. John D. Lee took the blunt of this for the church. He also took the blunt of it for the people that were at the massacre. Some of them are on your monument out here. They were there. There were 100 or so white folks from Powhatan, Cedar, Washington, and Santa Clara. St. George was not here at that time. So the matter was settled, and it's been settled. John D. Lee took the blunt of it. It ought to just be put to rest. It hadn't ought to go any farther, but it doesn't. There's too many false stories, too many false information that's passed out to people. The man ought to be who he is, and I can stand here and tell you that I don't believe he would like to have his statue in your monument. You all approved it at one time, you shot it down, you've nothing but run the man in the ground, people have. Why should he give the respect to have his statue out there? So I am a person that believes he served his self in this massacre. He took the blunt of it for the people. He was there, and he took the blunt for himself. And that's all I have to say about it. I wish you people would read the history. You're all related, one way or another, to this man. If it's not here, go back and start to read the history of when your ancestors came. You'll find out we all crossed paths.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is H. Richard Williamson. And I'm sorry that I look a little bit overdressed, but I came straight from work to this meeting. And so that's why I am the way I am tonight. I'm the second great-grandson of John D. Lee, and I'm mighty proud of it. And I know that there is controversy about this matter, and I respect the feelings and the views of other people, but I'd just like to say a few words, and I'm going to make it awfully brief because I know this meeting has gone on for a long time. We will never know in our lifetime the whole truth of what took place at Mountain Meadows or what followed it. I just hope that we might refrain from undue judgment, from too harsh of judgment at this time about my great-great-grandfather John D. Lee. I might say a couple of things of history. The Indians called him Yagits, which means crybaby, because the night before he tried to prevent this thing from happening. And he talked to the council and he talked to the Indians because the Indians were anxious to get on with it. And when he couldn't convince them not to do it, he cried. And the Indians called him Crybaby, which is Yoggins. This is according to the history of Juanita Brooks. And also when he was finally executed, his body was taken to Panguitch, Utah, in which he was buried. I just wish that we could remove somehow the stigma that has been created by rumors and hearsay by doing the right thing on his behalf. Let me see. He was a charter member of the city of the Washington City, which has been discussed before, living here for 13 years. This man carried the blame and the shame on his shoulders so that the rest of the early families in this area could live normal, happy lives. He was sacrificed on our behalf. It's time to give him some credit. It is time to make things right. And I might say on the 20th of April, 1961, President David O. McKay and the first presidency of the church and the quorum of the 12 apostles reinstated John D. Lee to his full membership and restored all his priesthood blessings to him. May we bury the past and move on from here. My father, John Wesley Williamson, put on the headstone of John D. Lee that was over there in Panguitch, Utah in about 1962. On his tombstone, the words that come from the book of John, "Know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." May we follow this admonition and do what is right to place the statue of John D. Lee in its rightful place. May we finish the job that we started 10 years ago. And now my wife, Linda Williamson, would just like to say something about Washington Adair, whose statue is here in this square of the founders of Washington City.
Just quickly, I am so proud. Linda Williamson, resident Coral Canyon, Washington City. I am really proud that I'll be able to have another relative if we can get the statue up. Of the Adair brothers, that the statue is over here, and we're founders, and then to have John D. Lee's rightful place at the center of those statues. I will be so proud and of that honor, in not only as a family member but also as a resident of Washington City. And it's a beautiful statue. I am so proud that the Lee family stepped up and didn't let that statue go. They paid, what, I think $35,000, the Lee family, to be able to preserve this statue, and please put it back where he belongs. And that's all I wanted to say.
I'm Renee Goodler-Ballard, and I've read in the paper what was said about John Lee, about the statue being placed back up. Excuse me, I've got to calm down. Anyway, they suggested somebody else be put on that spot. But I want to stand here and say I vote that you put John D. Lee there where history meant for him to be. You've got to remember back then when they came to Utah, they were driven here time and time again. Their families were killed. They were attacked. Even the President of the United States put an extinction order on all Mormons. I don't know what involvement he had, but I did read his confession that is on the internet. Very interesting. There was a lot of people that took part in this thing, and we'll never know what part John D. Lee played. I'm not a resident of John D. Lee. I mean a relative. I'm not a member of the society, the historical society. But I do think that history will not be completed until you put the John D. Lee marker back on where he was intended in the first place to be. I'm a resident of Washington City.
Honorable Mayor, City Councilman, I am Lyle Bunker, 94 years old, born in Delta, Utah, and I came here in 1980 and have made my home here. And I well remember as a child, or at least 15 years old, I heard my father and his neighbor arguing about the Mountain Meadow Massacre and John D. Lee. I heard it. I didn't know what they were talking about, but I heard it over the years of my growing up. And when I came to Washington and made my home here, I said to myself, I'm going to get all the literature I can get and everything I can read about the Mountain Meadow Massacre and John D. Lee. I went to the site many, many times. I've been there and walked all over the site, and I've read the story over and over as each writer has written about it. Now, what I come to the conclusion now is we don't know exactly what took place there. Why judge a man that we don't know what happened in the past about whether or not his statue should be displayed? I recommend to the City Council and the Mayor that you do display that monument and statue. I sat on the back porch of my home just this morning, and I said to my wife of 71 years, I said, look at this beautiful scenery that we've got here. Isn't this beautiful? I wonder what John D. Lee would say if he came here today and saw this. I recommend to you, you do display that monument. It is worthy of it. All the beauties around here is wonderful. I love it. I've never heard anybody that didn't love it. I recommend highly that you display this monument. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bunker.
My name is Priscilla Cahoon, and I'll have to admit, this has been quite an interesting council meeting tonight. I was directly responsible way back with the Historical Society that we did research and that we decided that John D. Lee should go on the Monument Plaza. Many things have taken place since then, but I think you gentlemen in our audience understand that here is a man who did a lot for this city and that he should still remain standing right on Monument Plaza and not off in a corner. He should be recognized. That is my recommendation to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla.
My name is Bill Loader. I'm a 38-year resident of downtown Dogtown, USA. Proud of it. And I'm here tonight to talk to you about John D. Lee due to the fact that I had an epiphany experience when 1972, while taking a drive from Cedar City, where I was attending college at the time, I seen this Mountain Meadow sign on the side of the road, and I said, I remember studying that in 8th grade history. I wanted to go in there and look it over, which I did, and had that special experience. I'm not going to go into it other than the fact that I kind of committed myself to be a voice for those bodies that are laying there that can't speak for themselves anymore, and try to clarify this. I was involved in this issue back 10 years ago. I was one of the people that didn't want the statue erected here, and still don't. George and Brother Bunker say they've studied this issue extensively. I have as well, reading the diaries of John D. Lee, Juanita Brooks's books on his biography, and of course the Mountain Meadow Massacre. And the most latest edition, written by Ronald Walker, Richard Turley, and Glenn Leonard from the LDS Church, who had access to all the church records. And this was published in 2008. And the fact remains, gentlemen, that he was convicted in a federal court of law in Beaver, Utah. It was established he led the Indians there, and he did promote for them to attack the wagon train. That's a fact. He said he took the white flag down, which I concur with, but there's one thing I have a little problem with. It was mentioned that he didn't take any lives. He drove the wagons away with the little children. Yet in Massacre, in his books, it says, during the ride to the Meadows, Methodist minister George Stokes, father of the deputy who arrested Lee, accompanied him. According to a reporter, Lee ventured a confession of sorts, telling Reverend Stokes that he had killed 5 immigrants and possibly 6. That was the one thing Lee kept to the last. He was convicted in a court of law. He did a terrible act along with several other of his Mormon brethren. Hate, Dame, to an extent, avoided justice. Some were on the lam for many years because of federal warrants out for them. Kling and Smith turned state's evidence. Our Jacob Hamlin gave damning evidence in court that convicted John D. Lee, and D. Lee was very bitter about that and called him Dirty-Fingered Jake. And he was most disappointed by the fact that he felt that Brigham Young had deserted him in his straits. But John D. Lee never implicated Brigham Young in the Mountain Meadow Massacre, and he very well, based on his bad feelings toward Brigham Young at the end, could have, but didn't. And this really put a kind of a wrench in the federal machine, because they was really out to get Brigham Young and have him convicted of implication into this Mountain Meadow Massacre. But I feel other people should have been judged at the same time. They didn't get picked up, or they turned state's evidence, or whatever the case may be. But he was justifiably, in a federal court of law, found guilty of these things, and justice was meted out. And I respectfully recommend that you deny placing the statue before the council and the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
My name is Bill Stoltz. I'm a resident property owner in Washington City. As most of you council members know, I appeared at the work session meeting when this topic came up a month ago. I was opposed to the city placing the statue of John D. Lee on city property then, and I am opposed to that now. There's a lot of history. A lot of it was discussed today. There's much history that is in dispute. As I said last month, the history I was taught in school over 50 years ago, 60 years ago now, didn't and doesn't jive with George Staley's. nor does really the essay that the church, the LDS Church, put out last month agree with George. The fact is, John D. Lee is a convicted mass murderer. Premeditated murder. You can try to whitewash history. I'm sure that family members, his descendants, want to have everybody think well of him. And I'm sure that he did many fine things for this part of the country. However, the fact is, he was convicted in a court of law of murder. Not just a dispute with somebody, a crime of sudden passion or whatever. It was premeditated mass murder of innocent men, women, and children. For Washington City to give any degree of credibility to this person through putting up a statue or in other ways, I think is unconscionable, beyond reason. I am just amazed that it even is up for consideration. I think, well, I know at the work session meeting that there was some comments made by one of the council members about what his grandmother told him about John D. Lee, and it wasn't very favorable. I think there's a lot of history, and it isn't just what was presented by George and his associates tonight. One thing that struck me in listening to how John D. Lee was made a scapegoat by the church, whoever threw him under the wagon, but he stood up as an honorable man and took the blame. I didn't hear that in a court of law, he said, I don't need a trial, I'm guilty. I'm an honorable man and I am guilty, and I will go to my death with a firing squad because I am guilty. It seems inconceivable to me that he is such a hero that took the blame, but he didn't admit to it. He didn't admit to it in the court of law. He was convicted. Was a criminal, still is a criminal, and to me it is inconceivable that this city would consider putting up a statue on city property honoring him. This community prides itself in values, family values, ethical values, moral values. Again, inconceivable that the city would honor somebody with a record like John D. Lee. And I wholeheartedly request that you deny Mr. Staley's proposal to place the statue on city property. And thank you very much. I do appreciate it. As I said at the last meeting, I'm not an activist. I don't go out and get a bunch of people to show up and all that stuff. I'm an old conservative and so on, but I believe in right is right and values are values, and I would recommend that the city council act accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, gentlemen of the City Council, I am Mel Harmon. I was born in St. George, but I consider myself to be a son of Washington. I'm a former vice president of the Washington City Historical Society and a former president. When the monument to pioneer women was dedicated, and Elder Holland was here, I conducted that session. I have 7 great grandmothers that I can proudly state have their names inscribed on the monument. I love this town. The Tanners and the Alexanders and the Averets are my relatives, my ancestors. I understand the feelings of descendants of John D. Lee. My conclusion concurs with that of the previous two gentlemen, but I don't agree with all of the words. For example, to characterize the man as a criminal perhaps is unduly harsh. None of us is perfect. I am a criminal lawyer by profession. I sympathize with the Lees, but in my profession, having handled numerous murder cases, I dealt with numerous families of murder victims, and I sympathize with the descendants who lost family members in the massacre. I visited the plaza this morning. I noticed the beautiful logo of Washington City, of the cotton ball. And I read the words heritage, pride, and progress. As a longtime resident of this community, and my parents took me to the Washington Fields in 1940. Things were very different then. As the previous speaker said, all consideration aside in terms of what specifically happened, the fact is this was adjudicated in a court of law. John D. Lee was convicted of murder in the first degree, and he was executed. I am concerned for this town, for this city. I'm concerned about the controversy that this will create. I have no opposition to the monument of John D. Lee being placed somewhere in the city, some other neighborhood, but not on city property. A city like Washington doesn't present the image of condoning mass murder. Now, there is one interpretation of what happened at the Meadows, which was a young man and two other Confederates from the wagon train decided to try to go to Cedar City to get help because there was a 5-day siege that had been underway. And the young man was killed, and the other two were tracked down and killed. And a council was held shortly before, and it was determined as a result of that, everyone who could speak had to be eliminated. So after a 5-day siege, Mr. Lee and another brother, under color of a white flag, approached the wagon train. They were encircled, they were barricaded, they were armed. And someone in the wagon train responded with a white flag. And there was a brief conversation between 4 individuals. 2 of the members of the Fancher Party and Mr. Lee and his associate. And then the 4 went in and they discussed a settlement. Well, things must have been pretty grim for the people in the wagon train to agree to the terms that they agreed to. Maybe they were nearly out of supplies, perhaps low on ammunition. In any event, they agreed. These people headed to California, these immigrants, agreed to lay down their arms. They agreed to walk 35 miles to what they were told would be safety from the Indians. They trusted the two representatives who'd come to them, and Mr. Lee, by accounts I've read, was the person engaged in the negotiation. They brought the two wagons down to the children who were young, who couldn't. Really make any type of meaningful comments. Were loaded into the wagons. Another wagon was brought, and a woman who was very sick was placed into it, and 2 or 3 other people, and they went off, and then the women and the teenagers, the young women, went in a group, and after they'd gone a quarter of a mile, the men were lined up in single file. And someone's walked next to them, armed. And the signal was given, and everyone was killed. That isn't right. What happened there is despicable. With all due respect to the family and to those who are in favor of this proposal. A progressive city like Washington, a city which expects us to be proud of it, does not allow a statue to be placed in the center of town, in a place of honor, when that individual has the history of Mountain Meadows. A federal court adjudicated him guilty. And the members of this audience and anyone else can say whatever they want to say. That is a fact. And I must concur with the previous gentleman. I think it is unconscionable. I made the same speech 10 years ago. I was against it. And if it comes up again, if I'm able, I will appear to say what I believe is right for this city. We don't need this type of controversy. This monument can be placed anywhere in the city of Washington. But gentlemen, please, not on city property. I urge you to deny the application for placement of the statue of John D. Lee on city property in front of the old school, the Historical Society, right here in Main Street. We're asking for trouble if we do that, and we don't want controversy. This is a world which is floating in violence. Bad things can happen. And I'm not saying that we have to make decisions based upon what we're afraid might happen. But we're creating this circumstance. There's already been a ruling that this was a court of law, res judicata, would not permit a rehearing, but it isn't. But I am urging you to stick with the decision previously made by the Washington City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel.
Mr. Harmon, you're a lawyer, right?
I am a lawyer. That's not a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer, but I want to ask you one thing. I'm Irene Prisby Slack. I was born here in Washington. I'm proud to be from Washington. I want to ask you about Hans Mill. Who's paying for all those people that were killed? How many people were put in a building, taking their guns away and shooting them at women and kids?
Ms. Prisby, I don't know if Hans Mill is really in
What?
up here. I appreciate the analogy, but I'm not so sure we're talking apples to apples here with Hans Mill.
I just want you to know that Hans Mill, when they shot all the Mormons in Hans Mill, I've been there.
So have I.
My grandfather, Boggs, was the first one to come into Salt Lake City. And I'm a Prisby from Washington, Utah. But I want to ask you guys, what did John D. Lee do so bad that those other people didn't do in Hans Mill and the other places? How many people was chased out of their homes? How many mothers laid awake out in the streets while they were shooting their little kids and all of their parents and their husbands?
I agree, but I think we're talking about
that's all I
different.
want to say.
I appreciate it.
I think that Mr. Lee, a statue should be put right where you guys had it ready to go. And he was, but I still think that he took a lot of blame because he loved the church and he loved Brigham Young. That's all I've got to say.
Thanks, Mrs.
But
Prisby.
Hans Mill and all those places, they killed our Mormons. They killed a lot of my relatives.
Unless somebody's really
Yeah.
wants to talk about it. I think we've heard both sides very fairly. But I would like to say three things that I feel like that my integrity was insulted. I'd like you to tell me where I lied or told a story that was wrong about John D. Lee. You insulted me by saying I
this
did.
rhetoric, George. I don't know.
Well, I know that, but he called me, he says, the story I told was a lie. And I don't appreciate that because I feel like I told the truth as it was written by all historians. I wasn't there. I can only say as it was written by all historians. The second thing is that Brother Loder said that he wasn't in the wagon carrying the children, that he killed 5 people. Now that could be a story that newspaper person made up. I know that in the history of my great-great-grandfather, that he and John D. Lee drove the 2 wagons that had the children in, and he did not, according to my great-great-grandfather's history, did not kill anybody at that massacre. The next thing is that I know that he was convicted. Why was he convicted? Because the mood changed and everybody knew what had to be done. Someone had to be convicted. I think as a lawyer, Mel Harmon knows that there's been very many people convicted in federal court that are innocent, that people lied in trials. And I feel like this is what happened with John D. Lee. I also know that many innocent, guilty people are found innocent in a court of law. Yes, he was convicted. I don't think anybody is arguing that, and in a federal case, he was convicted and he was executed for it as he was convicted. There's nobody that's disagreeing with that, but I feel like that he was railroaded. The next thing is the state of Arizona put this monument up knowing the history of John D. Lee. If the state of Arizona feels like that he was a great man for what he did in the 3 years he was at Lee's Ferry, 4 years, and still put this monument up, they recognized what a person he was, and I think they understood, the committee that did this, what happened at his conviction. Washington City should have the same respect that the Arizona had, honoring a person that did a lot for Washington, but as we know, was involved in the Mountain Meadow Massacre. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is John Adamson. I live at 633 Pocahontas Drive, Washington City. I moved here, my wife and I moved here 3 years ago from Anchorage, Alaska. We love this town. We're growing to love this town more and more every day. We love southern Utah. Living 50 years in Alaska, Alaskans had a saying, and that is, we don't give a dang how they do it outside. And I'm getting the sense that Utahns feel the same way. They don't care about what others think about how they operate business, run government, this or that. I bring that up because I want to say two words: public perception. Well, I was sitting earlier this evening listening to the commentary about the zoning change. I was reading a national and international magazine. And in this magazine, there was a short blurb about how the school district in Wasatch County changed or edited or photoshopped the pictures in the school yearbook. And that made national and international news. And when I read that and even heard about it, it kind of almost embarrassed me as a new Utahn to see what other people think. Well, again, apparently Utahns don't care what other people think, but I say public perception means a lot. And I think public perception should mean a lot to Washington City. About a year ago, my parents passed through. They wanted to see where we live, wanted to see Washington City, this beautiful town. And I took them to the museum and the statue location, and we toured it. And my dad fell in love with the museum. We looked at all the busts of the early founders and settlers of the area, and I enjoyed it. And by the way, I really enjoyed the history lesson tonight on John D. Lee and Mountain Meadow Massacre and everything. But I'm not sure how I would have explained to my dad or my parents the caveat or the history about Mr. Lee if his bust were placed there. About a month ago, I was on my motorcycle touring the beautiful roads and byroads of southern Utah, confirming why I love moving here so much. And I saw the sign about the Mountain Massacre Memorial, and I decided, well, it's time to take a break. Let me go in and take a look at it. I've heard of the Mountain Massacre before, but I really don't know anything about it. And I didn't know anything about John D. Lee. So I pulled in and took a break, and it was hard for me to imagine how such a horrific tragedy could have occurred in such a beautiful location. And I want to say kudos to the LDS Church, of which I'm not a member. They erected a stunning, awesome memorial there, and it was just beautiful. And I reflected about what could have happened in that whole situation. But again, I just want to say public perception means a lot, and I just don't want to be embarrassed again about if the national media picks up the story about John D. Lee and the bust and the support of Washington City, then how are we going to explain that and account for that? So I'd encourage the council members to not approve the request for the bust location. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got two more.
Name is Paul Christensen, 1974 South Paloma. I testified before, but I'd like to add some comments on this, and this is why I'm here. I mentioned before that I write a garden newsletter, and in that garden newsletter I've expanded, and I think it's important that the people in Washington City, because they should understand their history. And I think that the history is very important and it's overlooked. And my hat's off to the people in Washington City because of the dedication and the things that they've done to preserve their history, where a lot of cities have not done so. We have the monument to Adair Springs. We have the Covington home, which has been preserved. Unfortunately, just down the street on the same block, John D. Lee's house is gone. I'm not here to condemn John D. Lee, or I'm not here to retry him. And I'm not here with the family to eulogize him either. But in my newsletter, I want you to know that I write a short, just a little paragraph each time. I send it out 3 times a month. And it's on Washington City history. And I've had to do a lot of research in this and doing this. And of all the things I've come across, there's no person that's been more involved or done more for the city of Washington than John D. Lee has. He was involved in everything. The grist mill that he put up on the Cotton Mill Creek is no longer there. Everything that we've gone through has been eliminated on John D. Lee, basically. There's nothing left here for him, even though he was one of the greatest of the people that settled this valley. There's nothing left of him. Now, whether or not we want to continue to whitewash history or not, that's up to you guys what you want to do. But I feel that history should not be whitewashed. That we should give due process to things that are due, and that we should continue to. I don't know that you know, and a lot of people are condemning him, and they seem to be retrying him for the Mountain Meadow Massacre, which is, to me, is irrelevant to what we're trying to do here with John D. Lee. And with John D. Lee, I think what we should be doing is looking at his contribution to what he's done for the city and what his influence had for the city and why we are here. You know, the pioneers, when they came here to this valley, I don't know of a group of people that had it any harder than these people did. The things that they had to endure, the hardships that they had to endure, there's nothing that pales, everything else pales in comparison to what they had to go through. Living in lean-tos for the first 2 years, no homes, no wood to build homes with, nothing even to build a fence with. The washing of the fields out with the Virgin River that flooded, and they built a dam, and every year it got flooded out. Most of the people that were in the first group that Brigham Young sent here abandoned and left because of the hardships that were here. You know, I won't go on anymore, but I think that John D. Lee was such a contributor to our city that we need to consider that. And I feel, and personally, that without his contribution, that Washington City would not be here. Thank you.
Roldo Turner, I'd like to say just a word. The meeting's been going on so long that I know you're all getting homesick sitting up there. But my grandfather, when I was quite a young boy, Grandpa Turner, I don't know why, he talked about John D. Lee quite a bit. And I remember some of the stories he was telling me, how these people come through the state of Utah. There's a lot of people come through the state of Utah. And they come through with just enjoying themselves. And they had no problems at all. He's telling about these group of people that come, they had a lot of cattle and a lot of animals with them, it seemed like. And I know they'd cut the fences at night of the farmers and just let their cattle go in and tromp around and do a lot of damages as they come all through the state of Utah. And you commented that the farmers in the morning get up and chase their animals out of their field and it's all ruined. And these guys would tell them, well, we was back there in Missouri. We ran you out back there and we did this and that. They treated the Mormons so bad. We haven't heard that part yet. But John D. Lee, I feel like he is, I don't think they'll ever know the truth of what he really did or what he really didn't do. They know some of the facts, but I know if he wasn't such a good member of the church to Brigham Young as a prophet, I don't think he would have accepted what he accepted and took the blame for what he took. I feel like he's a man of honor. He's one of the main men of honor here in Washington. He come here when they come down off from the Black Ridge up there with, I remember Dad used to show me the old road on the east side of the river where they used to take the horses and go up there and how bad it was. And that's where they got to Washington, on horses. And he did great things for the city of Washington. If you'd put his statue up there, I would feel wonderful about it. I realize he has got some things hanging on him that probably a lot of people say we shouldn't do this. And but I think if the truth was really known, he wouldn't have accepted what he did and had his life taken, only if he's such a good member of the church. And so I'm going to leave it up to you. I'm not going to say anything more, but I know if we know the whole story, you would be anxious to put John D. Lee up where he's supposed to be. Thank you.
I'm Lynn Christensen, and I probably caused a little controversy in this town, but you know what? It's amazing how we let things dictate our lives. Dixie College had to get rid of things because it dictated, and in Washington, there's controversy. We can't have that. I'm just going to say one thing, and I'm going to sit down. Any one of us, without any sin, let them throw that first rock. And then after that, then we can deal with it. And just remember, that person turned and said, go your way and sin no more. And I'm just saying to all of us that I think every one of us have created a problem at one place or another. Give the man the due that he has deserved.
Okay, this is the last one, okay?
I'll make it short. Cindy Turner. Cindy Turner. Before everyone got up, you took a vote on John D. Lee, and I think the majority was for putting the statue up. I only counted 3. So I hope you listen to the voice of the community. We want John D. Lee for what he did for Washington to get it started. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Anyone want to make a vote?
Well, Mayor, I already kind of discussed when George brought this before us before my feelings, and my feelings have been kind of vindicated here again this evening by the fact this is such a controversial issue. And I think one of the hardest things that we try and do as a community is to build our image, to try and protect our image we discussed tonight, and our zoning, what we try to do to build a feel and tie our community together. And so personally, I can't support and won't support putting something in, not that I don't, I just don't think that the rumors and hearsay are going to be vindicated whether he stands or whether he doesn't stand. In fact, I truly believe that what was said here, if you ask John D. Lee, he'd say, leave my statue out of here. Bury me and let me die, he'd be done with me type thing. So anyway, I guess I'll make the motion that we do not approve the standing of the statue.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Mayor, I'll second that motion.
Okay.
Nice and high.
Segmiller, aye.
Turek, aye.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you very much for So the vote was to not have the statue put up by a unanimous vote. Okay, we'll move on to item 9. Consideration to approve a special event for the Southern Utah Half Marathon from Highland Park to the Virgin River Trail to take place on August 30th, 2014. He not here? I guess we'll. Yeah.
Yeah,
You waited through a lot.
Trying to get through.
Mayor, maybe just give it a few minutes to clear out.
Steve, let's give it a few minutes.
Steve,
Anybody
I was
need
looking for your number to text you and say we can handle this. I'm sorry you have to wait so long.
No, very educational.
I was going to say, you should have got a good history lesson. Taking notes.
Do you want me to start?
We ready, Steve? Go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Steve Hooper. Today I'm representing Red Mountain Running Events. We're proposing to be approved for a half marathon event on August 30th, starting at Highland Park up there on top of Coral Canyon, and coming down Highland Drive. We're going to cross Telegraph, kind of Kittywampus on the Telegraph, and then run against traffic on the...
Excuse me, Steve. Mike, will you go shut those doors if we're going to have that kind of a noise? Thank you. Go Steve. I apologize.
No, that's fine. So cut across Telegraph and then go against traffic going down on the shoulder. We'll have barricades there, those candle cones, going all the way down to Washington Parkway, where we'll take a left, go across the school trust land for just about 200 meters, and then pick up the canyon trail and go down the canyon trail all the way down to the river, and then we're going to access the new trail that connects to Sullivan Park and head all the way down the bike path, the Virgin River Trail, to Bloomington Park in St. George. And so the race is going to start at 6 a.m. we're planning, and the runners have a 3-hour window to complete the race, so it doesn't get too hot.
Do you have a, I'm sorry,
yeah.
Do you have an alternative if in fact the trail is not open along the Virgin River, because there's a possibility it may not be?
Okay, so what's the estimated date of completion?
Well, we don't know. Right now, we've got a walkway that needs to be built, and the lumber and the wood that's needed for that walkway is delayed.
Okay.
So that's pushing the whole. Now, it could be by August 30th.
Yes.
It could be, and we're hopeful it will be. But I just was going to suggest you may want to have a plan B in case that.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll kind of take a look at that, and I'll talk to.
To make sure you don't get caught.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Any other questions?
Steve, you can run in a circle and then just...
Manager, isn't that, so I haven't been to the trail yet, I've been meaning to get out there, but isn't it graded? Is there it's just not asphalted yet?
Well, it's not asphalt.
There's a
whole
boardwalk.
Section that has to have a boardwalk because of the critical habitat.
Okay.
So they would not even be able to get into that area.
Which would be awesome to run across once it's done.
It's going to be a beautiful part of our trail. But that was the problem area. So we actually are above the critical habitat, and it's the treated wood that's necessary for this particular project because of its location that we heard today that it's going to be delayed, and we haven't got a new updated time. And we were so tight in August anyway, it could bump us. Our hopes is that we would be done in August.
Okay.
And I'm going to say I'm hopeful that by the 30th we probably would be, but I also don't want to. I would think you'd be wise.
Yes. Okay. We can take a look at that and see and talk to Chief Keith and see what he suggests with that.
You visit with Chief and
yeah.
He's okay with everything?
Well, with that so far.
Okay, good. Any questions for Steve?
Looks good to me.
Considered on our Dogtown Half Marathon, we have a similar starting location, but then instead of coming to the west down Telegraph, they go to the east and kind of take a little bit of a dirt path and then tie into the trail system a little sooner. You considered that option?
Yeah, so you'd end up still with the same situation though if you're trying to go down the bike path to Bloomington Park. Yeah. So we'd have to figure something else out.
It seems like it's a pretty wide shoulder along Telegraph.
Yeah, that shoulder, they fixed it recently, going up towards the hill there. So you can pretty much have a car and some extra space there for runners to run on. And it pulls off there into the dirt before the sidewalk starts, so there's not going to be any problems with a narrow shoulder.
You got a lot of interest so far?
Well, I'm trying to get it approved. Yeah, I'm trying to get it approved quick so we can.
Good.
Because we're getting close.
I looked at your route, and I think it'd be a great route. I think that you'll find a lot of interest in it, I would hope.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be
the best of all, a couple different communities and down along that river. I think it'd be a great route.
Yeah,
where does it end again?
At Bloomington Park.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Down by Manowar.
You're all along the river. That'd be great.
Yep. And we have another concern with the overpass being finished down in St. George, but they are thinking that we should be okay.
Oh, the Mall Street Bridge?
Mm-hmm.
Mall Drive Bridge?
So what are your shoes that can go on the dirt too?
Yes, maybe. We might be in a situation like that. We'll see. But it'll be good to get it at least going this first year, I think.
Yeah.
Your trail shoes.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you runners had special like gym shoes.
Hey, I don't know the half. This guy knows.
That's all I knew, that running hurts people, so I stay away from it.
All right, if there's no other concerns, I'll entertain a motion to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
I'll make the motion, Mayor, that we approve the conditional event for the Southern Utah Half Marathon for August 30th, 2014, with the following route closures and whatnot that we needed.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second.
Turek, aye.
Sig Miller, aye.
Staley, aye.
Nice and aye.
All right, item B, consideration to approve an alternate parade route for the Days of 47 parade. I don't know if you all are up to speed on the Days of 47 has desired to have a Southern Utah division, if that's the right word. So they've organized a Southern Days of 47 Dixie. Is that Sherry? Is that what it's called? For Southern Utah, and we're hosting it in Washington City. And I have a relative that wants to change the parade route from Main Street, start at Main Street, go down Main Street to 200 North, go over to 200 East, go down 200 East to Telegraph, and then do the parade route. I do have a couple of concerns about that. 200 East is just a parking lot. I don't know if you noticed that. And we have a designated route already established. So I'm just presenting that, and they will do probably what
was their reason for wanting the Main Street?
The night before, they're having a Dutch oven dinner with, correct me if I'm wrong, Sherry, up around the boilers. They were going to have families that would participate in the parade. They would have a Dutch oven dinner and a camp out, I guess, and then they would use that as the staging point.
Is this parade on the 24th?
24th of July, yes.
Is it the same as the one we've been having every year?
Well, it's the only thing that's going to be different is it's a group or an organization rather than the LDS Church.
But it would incorporate the parade.
Right, it would incorporate the parade. And
so the church's 24 celebration this will be the parade for that. Mayor, is that what?
Correct.
We have a parade route.
Yeah, come on up, Sharon. Maybe you can clarify a little, because you're on the committee, correct?
Sherry Reeder. So because our 24th celebration is one of the biggest ones in the state still of the, the history of the church. Of course, everything becomes a huge liability. And so the church wanted to kind of get out of that responsibility. And the Days of 47 committee asked that we would host it because we do have a successful 24th. So now it would be open to all vendors, all communities. It wouldn't be just the Washington City Stake that would do it. And hopefully it will grow into something bigger. And yeah, so there's a committee and the thing by the boilers, it'd be kind of like a pioneer trek almost. They encourage people to, you know, camp and kind of be pioneers for the night.
Do you think,
so.
though, it would be okay if we just had our original parade route?
See, that's my thought, is why couldn't you?
I always just say, why try to fix it if it's not broken?
Yeah.
Unless
see, I like
Chief
that.
Keith has you're okay with the route. I know 300 is kind of an issue up there, but okay.
Yeah, and I would think even with your.
Can
thing
you
at the
share that?
boilers,
Can you share that with?
Yeah.
Because
Sherry,
when
it's
I
still
share it,
pretty good.
Sherry,
You can come down to 300 north from the boilers, so you're down a block. You cut up and you hit the elementary school right there where your staging is.
Yeah.
So you're only basically a block and 2 blocks, and you're
Yeah.
to staging. So
I just think it would add more confusion because people are used to our route
Correct.
and we switch it up. It just causes more
I agree.
confusion that we don't need because it's already going to be kind of a
thank you.
confusion. So
Thank
thank you.
I appreciate that.
Would you share that with the president? Yeah. Okay, because when I usually share it, it gets a little.
I will. I'll take it on.
Mayor, I'll make the motion then that the parade route remain the same as we have previously adopted for the Days of 47th parade.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion and a second.
Nice and I.
Staley, aye.
Seg Miller, aye.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I think it'll be good. I think it's going to be a good celebration, and we are still planning on fireworks, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
I always say weather pending, but yeah, that's a plan.
Cheesecake approved.
Item 10, resolutions. Consideration to approve a resolution adopting the 2014-2015 fiscal year budget.
Well, Mayor, we've spent 4 weeks in a row in a public setting with this thing and about 8 months on the budget. And I don't have a lot more to add to this other than tonight, staff is recommending the adoption of a budget of $50,748,423 for fiscal year 2015.
It's a good budget.
It is.
It's a budget that staff and council and collectively was worked on, capital, operational, etc. It's a good budget. And it's a conservative budget.
Sounds like you're ready to make that motion.
Yeah, okay, there we go. I guess I had to get involved here. Let's see. I'll motion that we approve or that we adopt the 2014-2015 fiscal year budget.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion and a second.
Turek, aye.
Seg Miller, nay. And just to qualify that, Mayor, I've had some absences where I haven't been as involved with this budget as prior years, and so it's mostly just a reflection of my involvement.
Okay.
Or lack of.
So noted. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have been involved. Staley, aye.
Nice and I.
All right, thank you. It passes 3-1. Item B, consideration to approve a resolution setting the property tax levy for Washington City fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2014. Okay, Will Wright.
Mayor, City Council, I'm back again with another property tax proposal. As proposed by Washington County, they have set the mill levy for the 2014 tax year at .001505. That is down from what we were last year. We were at .001621. The reason, of course, being that we do have more value in property. If you understand the property tax rate, the state legislature has mandated that we have a consistent flow of income coming on that property tax. So they use a 5-year rolling average as to what we should collect each year. And that's how they determine the mill levy. So people aren't necessarily going to see a smaller amount on their property tax amount, but the mill levy has gone down because of the increase in property value. So I would make a recommendation that we approve that proposal on the property tax mill levy at .001505 for the 2014 taxable year.
Any questions for Mr. Will Wright? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Yeah, Mayor, I'll make the motion that we approve a resolution setting the property tax levy for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2014 at .001505.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Staley, I'll second it.
Nice and I.
Staley, aye.
Seg Miller, aye.
Turek, aye.
Thank you, and thank you, Carrie. Have a safe trip home.
He's got one more.
I'll get one
Oh,
more.
you've got one more? My heavens. Consideration to
Sorry.
approve a resolution setting the property tax levy for Washington City Special Service District in Coral Canyon for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2014.
This one will be easy. It is .003. It always has been since we've had the special service district. There has been no change in regard to that. We did do some refinancing of some bonds to keep it down at that level of .003 to put together a situation where we did not create any undue pressure on the people living in Coral Canyon to try to pick up some of that debt service that we have. So we have left that at .003, and my recommendation is that we approve the resolution to keep that at .003 as far as the mill levy for Coral Canyon.
Okay, thank you. Entertain a motion.
Mayor, I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution setting the property tax levy for the Coral Canyon the Washington City Special Service District in Coral Canyons for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2014 at .003.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second.
Eisen, aye.
Staley, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Turek, aye.
Thank you.
I've been working on your motel room for the night, so.
Nope, head home. Head home.
He said you have a bed in your office.
All right, we'll move on to item 11, consideration to approve the 5-year capital projects of Washington City.
I'll take care of that, Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you. Again, a lot of discussion with the capital budget. This usually runs in parallel with the operating budget, the annual budget, I should say. And last night we had a great deal of discussion with the council on allocation of resources above expenses, and they were allocated and are represented as such that 700,000 will be going to roads and 100,000 will be slotted to architectural design for the police department. The only reflection and change that you would see on your 5-year capital budget sheet is that 100,000, because Mike had already included that other in the capital budget sheet. So that's the only change from last night. So based upon that, we'd recommend an approval of the 5-year capital project as was discussed.
Any questions for the manager?
If not, I'll go ahead and make the motion that we approve the capital projects as discussed.
Second.
I have a motion and a second.
Eisen, aye.
Staley, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Turek, aye.
Thank you. Item 12, development agreement. Consideration to approve an extension of time for the Coral Canyon Development Agreement. Jeff Starkey.
This was just a provision in our development agreement that, interestingly enough, was signed by Mayor Pro Tem Turek at the time, back in 1999, which I found interesting. That simply put kind of a 15-year initial term, and back in the day, 15 years seemed like it probably was enough given how development was going, and but we also put in a provision that we could just kick it back in, but whoever owned the contract at that time would have to give us notice of. We just learned a couple of days ago that that we were running up against that time from SITLA, and so we just prepared the 15-year extension on it, which is what would have been anticipated under the actual agreement itself.
And it's necessary because it's not built out. Is that correct? It's just not finished. Is that why an extension is necessary?
Well, yeah, because we're still working under the agreement and everything with it. And I'll tell you what, I wish every development agreement we have on big projects were as far along as they are after 15 years, because most of them are much further in the front end of it. But specifically, it said we had to draft an extension agreement, written extension agreement for both parties to sign, and it had to be done before the expiration of the term, and we had to record it with the county recorder's office. So we followed all those requirements, and so we recommend doing it, just get it recorded so nobody questions it.
I think SITLA's been an admirable development partner for 15 years, and I think an extension is well worth our effort. So I'll make the motion, Mayor, that we approve the extension agreement extending the time or the term of time for the Coral Canyon Development Agreement.
Okay, I'll have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Turek, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Staley, aye.
Eisen, aye.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Item 13, reports. Any reports to offer before the committee tonight?
You say we've gone a little long, but I'll just quickly report from our Flood Control Committee that the Flood Control Authority has taken responsibility for the debris basins, flood control basins out in the Washington fields, which was a concern to the city because the NRCS was looking for somebody to become in charge since the canal company was divesting themselves and said, basically breach them. We don't need them anymore. Our fields are fields that need to be protected. And so it looked like if the flood authority didn't step up and do what we had created it to do, the city was going to end up with that. So we felt it was the appropriate thing for the flood control authority to do that, and they have done that. So it'll be a positive thing for the city.
Yeah, thank you. Anything to report? We'll move on to the city manager report.
One thing I want to show you, this is not taking much time to switch this over. I just want to show you, if you haven't had the opportunity to see, this is cemetery expansion. So this is, as you can see, they're still doing some landscaping along the parking lot area, but this is one of the entryways. This is looking toward the south of those trees that already exist along that ridge line there. We have two entryways right there, beautiful stonework with the wrought iron, and then on the north side, we'll just have offset wrought iron with the ability to move as the cemetery expands. And on the offset, it'll be offset in such a way as the errant soccer balls can be taken back up from the cemetery back into the soccer field. They've done a beautiful job up there, but we're anticipating that it should be done. I'll give them a little time, but probably by mid-July. We've already had some vandalism, and so we're working on that. I know the police department's working on that. The good news is they wrote their name in the cement, so we're hoping that won't I think it was just some kids. We had some of the curbing broke up and and that'll have to be replaced, but keep our eye on it. But it's beautiful. And then on the hill, I'll just mention on the hill, I didn't take a picture of it, but they're redoing the landscaping on the hill, which has always been kind of a problem for us. But they're taking the same design with the rock work and the wrought iron around the entryway to that parking lot, so it ties in. And then we'll be adding a small feature of that around the corner of 300 and Parkview, which ties all of it together. So it's going to be beautiful. We've already sold how many plots in this one? So 5 plots already. So should be the first. Anyway, other than answering any question, Mayor, that's probably the
any questions for the manager? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So made.
All right. I have a motion and a second to adjourn this meeting.
Nice night.
Save Miller, aye.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your efforts tonight. Drew, can I see you for just a minute?